and this is Adventist Talk for anyone who's interested in all things Adventist. In this episode, we have invited a name known by any former Adventist who is regularly online, Myles, who hosts his own fantastic YouTube channel called Answering Adventism. So when we left Adventism with the whole concept of, it was a little on the fear side. It was, I have a friend who was in Vietnam. He had a son that was in Vietnam who, as he would go into these Vietnamese villages, his whole job was to mine all the exits so that when they came back in, there wasn't a safe exit out. There was fear, and you thought you're going to be killed no matter which direction you went. It's kind of how we felt coming out of Adventism. So
that's why we wrote the book. It's okay
yeah,
not to be Seventh Adventist, or one of the reasons. We shouldn't say the reason.
right. And as we watched Myles' ministry is different. He's directly confronting Adventists themselves about erroneous doctrines. His site is fantastic. You go to his site and you can search all kinds of things that if you had a question about Adventism, go there and you can just search it, look it right up, and it's free. It's fantastic. You need to check it out.
Yeah. And he's taken the time and energy to fashion a systematic refutation of their fundamental worldview. And so that was very different than ours.
Yes.
We were trying to deal with former Adventists and questioning Adventists, but he went in for the Adventists themselves. So anyway, welcome, Myles. Glad you are here.
Yes.
That is quite the intro. It's just like, wow, they're just really like going. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's again, our mission goes back to educating, and this undertaking was not done by anybody else. This is already a small world as it is, but kind of like you mentioned, there's a lot of people that have come out and they've tackled, say, the investigative judgment, like Des Ford's systematic refutation of 1844 and investigative judgment. But it really didn't. Well, I mean, he remained, he wanted to remain a Seventh-day Adventist and identify as a Seventh-day Adventist. I'm in kind of a totally different boat on that front. But all of that to say, there was really no one that was doing this sort of, just response that had to get to the root issue, which, like you mentioned, is worldview. And they have a foreign worldview to Christians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you did a great job. I mean, I've been very, very impressed. That's why you wanted you on. But okay, so one of the things I wanted to start off with is that my mother, we're a different generation than you. We go back to being raised in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s. And my mom has always said, look, Adventism has changed. It's not the same old Adventism. And that's one of the things we want to just kind of bounce off you. Like, tell us what your beginnings were, your Adventist background as a child, and we want to go kind of from your childhood into why you left, and then finally end up, what you're doing now. But let's just start with your childhood and tell us what that was like growing up Adventist.
Yeah, so I grew up in like 90s and early 2000s. As like a child in my Adventism. I wasn't an Adventist like really into my adult year, or like I guess like later adult years. Okay. So I left about at this point it's been about 11 years. But I was raised, if you consider the spectrum within Adventism, you've already kind of mentioned it there, of like progressive or liberal, which doesn't mean the same thing obviously as like the political terms do. We would have been closer to like the conservative side, but it wasn't like it wasn't like super legalistic. My dad's kind of the like evangelical style SDA. Okay. So it's like still on the conservative side, but it's not like super what people would label oftentimes as like legalistic. My dad took we followed the health message. We weren't necessarily like reading Ellen White as a family or anything like that, but Adventist Home was essentially being, if you read that book, it was essentially being applied, because I've read the book and then can look back and say, oh, That's where this
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
idea came
right.
from,
yes.
or this came from, et cetera.
Right.
So it was applied. It was essentially taught. It was believed. I was educated in Adventist schools all the way up through University Sands High School.
Mhm.
And I went to summer camps every summer. So that was kind of the zeitgeist, if you will, of my um, really just, I guess, childhood to like
Yeah.
teen years.
Okay. So it does, because you say you were on more the conservative side, but that you sound more like my being raised. Did you go out to eat on Sabbath?
Oh, absolutely not.
Oh, no, okay, I mean, that was your side. We
Yeah,
did it.
that was
Did
me.
you drink anything with caffeine?
No, absolutely not.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was grounded for stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then-
I got punished for eating meat, like those type things.
Oh my,
So,
okay. Well, another thing that Arthur and I found we actually agreed on, because we were raised very differently, but we were afraid of non-Adventists. I don't even think we knew that at the time, but there was just some, oh, you've got non-Adventist friends.
There was always the you might be deceived. There's some version of being deceived through what you
yep.
read, watch. Don't read that book, because you could be deceived. It was very prevalent in how they taught.
Mhm.
See, my father was a principal, and then he was the educational superintendent over Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and was a pastor on top of that.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I got like line by line, Ellen White,
They did the morning
the
watch
Morning Watch,
every
Yep.
very very Adventist.
one time when right before we got married, we took a trip I took a trip with his family to get to know his family better for about, like, what was it, a week or two?
Yeah.
And we were in this camper trailer or whatever it was. And I was in back talking to his sister, and I said something, that he didn't like about Ellen White, and he was driving. He stopped the car and came back and bawled us out. You don't ever talk bad about Ellen White. And our family, that was pretty normal. Because
Right.
my dad did not think Ellen White was a prophetess, and my mother did. So anyway, yeah, so he was very, so compare that to, you guys. Were you scared of non-Adventists, or?
Well, so here's the thing, two things on that. One, my parents did not raise me to, like, they did not influence me to be that way. So like I had neighborhood friends, for example, that weren't Adventist. Did
You never
things
had
that
friends?
He did.
no,
Oh, you did? Okay.
neighborhood,
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I had neighborhood friends who weren't SDAs.
Okay.
And so I wasn't fearful from any sort of thing that my parents had said. But the second point I wanted to say was that I believe is just hard coded in the system. So even if you're not getting that from your parents, if you're immersed in the summer camps, Pathfinders. I mean, do you know the
That's right.
history
Yeah.
behind Pathfinders?
Oh yeah, I was in Pell.
Were you in Pathfinders?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, so all of that stuff, you're going to get these sorts of what I would call like the keystones of the movement. And that's just kind of hardwired into the movement. So like my parents didn't teach me that stuff, but I was definitely getting it because I was in schools. I mean,
Right.
and I've talked about this, and you have SDAs that they can't believe it. I don't believe it. And it's like, folks, you guys just had, what was it like? Oh, I probably couldn't find it right now, but it was within the last decade. They just did it again at one of their summer camps. They did like an end times drill
Yes, that's
where
right.
the kids
Oh,
were
yes.
essentially had to act as though and do like a mock, is it time to leave cities, time of trouble
Yeah.
type
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
And you get SDAs that are like, that's not true. That's not okay. Well, you can say that I'm lying, and you just had it happen at one of your summer camps. So I got to partake in things like those, which obviously sort of puts this it really comes back to this us versus them mindset of like it's us against everyone else out there, to the point where now even some of them are the remnant within the remnant types.
Right.
And now Satan has, Roman Catholicism's infiltrated Adventism, and now we have this split in Adventism. So there's the remnant amongst the remnant because Ted Wilson is,
Right.
totally he shook the hand of the Pope, and so now it's just the end of the world. So,
Yeah. So
I,
did you hear a lot of that growing up? You know, because my mother says they don't ever talk about that in the pulpit anymore. Like the Catholics are going to do the end time, last days, Sunday law thing.
yeah, and you typically heard it from the guys who, so like my dad, no.
Hmm.
My dad preaches the same way today. I still listen to my dad preach, and he preaches the same way today that he did 20 years
Okay.
ago. It's
Okay.
like the
Wow.
same stories. It's just like he again, he just has like he was influenced by different people. He was influenced by like these real evangelical style Seventh-day Adventists.
The Morris
So
Mendens.
yeah. So like not from him, but the thing is again, being a pastor, I was going to my dad's ministers meetings. I was
Uh-huh.
going to these sorts of things where you're going to have your quote unquote crusade guys, the
Mhm.
guys who are going around doing the 2 week Daniel seminar,
Yeah.
who, after being there for 4 days, then they're going to tell you that if you don't come and join them, you're going to experience the wrath of God, and God's angry with you, and you're in an apostate church, and the Bible talks about that, and all that sort of stuff. And there's going to be a projection of like a leopard on the ceiling, and
Yeah, yeah,
all that sort of
Right.
stuff.
yeah.
Which that sort of stuff is what scars people,
Yes,
especially when you're a kid. Is these like
that's right.
seminars where they have these elaborate, crazy depictions of these beasts and all that sort of stuff. So I was getting it from those type things, not necessarily at home.
Yeah. Yeah, well, when we were in fifth grade, I mean, he was in Seattle in the Seattle area, and I was in Texas. And I remember us reading the teacher, like during school, reading these horrible little novels about last day events where, I don't remember what it actually said, but I would have nightmares of my sisters and brothers. You know, I was gonna die from the Sabbath. But then when they'd bring my sisters and
Yeah.
brothers in front of me and start putting shoots in their fingernails and torturing them in front of me, that's what terrified me. And it
Yeah.
was interesting because I do have to tell my mother. My mother just laughed at me. She goes, "Don't believe any of that. None of that's true." So I didn't have terrible, long-lasting worries, but I knew a lot of people that did. So you were indoctrinated into that kind of thing too.
Oh, totally. And I mean, I used to, and I've talked about this before on the channel. I remember I used to pray sometimes at night. I'd say, God, any sins that I've forgotten, please forgive me for them. Because if I die in my sleep, I don't want my name to come up in the investigative judgment and I not make it.
That's right. That's right.
Because
Oh, see,
that's
that's awful.
Yeah, because but well then you're thinking things too like, well, but see, we don't believe that God tortures people forever.
Yeah,
Then
Right.
you start thinking about things like, because of course that's like one of the main talking points, is
yeah,
that God's character has been distorted,
yeah,
and that whole narrative. So yeah, when you're on that drip feed, obviously that stuff,
Yeah.
that's actually an area. It's funny you bring that up. We have a section on the website titled Adventisms, like what are Adventisms? So you can put that in the search bar, and what you'll get is all of these nuggets of things that Adventists oftentimes just assert, just as if it's just this is just plain. And you
yeah.
explain to them that's actually not in the Bible. That's actually from Ellen White. Like Adam was 2 times taller than the modern man.
Right.
Well, that's not
I
in the
don't remember
Bible.
that. Did you hear that, Arthur? I heard he was like
Not that particular way, but yes, I
that he was
heard it in
super
a different
tall.
way that
Yeah,
he was like 18 feet
yeah,
tall or something.
yeah,
Yeah, and maybe I summarized there. You can, again, we have that on the website, but
Yeah.
these sorts of things we call Adventisms,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I find that the most of these tend to be in the pictures that, and this is just coming from my talking to thousands of former Adventists at this
Mhm,
point.
mhm.
Mhm.
Most former Adventists have these Adventisms, and it comes in the form of like pictures regarding eschatological matters.
Mhm,
Yes.
mhm.
It's like you have this image in your mind of like meteors like crashing to
That's
the
Oh
earth, and
yeah.
like,
that's
That was interesting because for 7 years after we left Adventism, I had an online group called Former Adventist Fellowship or something like that. I mean, it's maybe not when I get mixed up with poor Colleen Tinker's group, but
yeah, former Adventists.
every single yeah. Well, we would get online on Facebook and we would talk, and that is one of the things that for decades, people who had left the church for 30 years would still have nightmares of those last day, those tapes continue to cycle in your brain, about last day events and all these terrible things happening. So yeah, that's a really difficult one to get out of your mind. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's often influenced. I was actually so a buddy of mine, Doug Ten Naple. He's well, he's an interesting guy. He invented a game in the '90s called Earthworm Jim. He was an animator. He's an artist. He does a lot of political stuff now.
Mhm.
But he well, we were gonna talk on my channel actually about the influence of art in people's like thinking and the way that art influences people because, and then we were gonna analyze specifically just because him and I both have art backgrounds, analyzing a lot of the SDA art because all that stuff is coming from that. Like they have a ton of art. I have a bunch of it in a room across the way, children's books predominantly.
Mhm.
So like cradle roll type stuff,
Oh yeah.
to get you like early, where some of the books that I have in there, it's just straight up and false. It's just not true at all. Like the
Mhm.
Daniel one, it's from the
Are you talking
my,
about the Arthur Grant? No, Graham Max. What was his name? Arthur Maxwell or something?
yeah.
The artist?
There's those.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
the Maxwell books, but these are actually my Bible friends, I want to
Yeah.
say.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
And I believe it's in that series, the story on Daniel, for example.
Mhm.
The whole lesson of what it's teaching kids is that Daniel is about being a vegetarian
Yeah, that's right.
and rejecting Babylon's wine.
I
That's
know.
right.
Yeah.
And Babylon's
He
wine
ate.
is supposed to be a parallel to believing Roman Catholic doctrine.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
Oh.
it's an eschatological. We're actually addressing this to some
Uh,
degree this
uh,
Thursday. An Adventist speaker who said the book of Daniel is all about Seventh Day Adventism. And so in
Wow.
there he says Daniel 1 and 2, it's eschatologically foreshadowing God's last day people is
mhm.
Daniel. He's taking a stand against Babylon and he's being persecuted for it, but he refuses to drink the Babylonian wine, which is
Yeah. Yeah.
supposed to be
Yeah.
Adventists in
Yeah.
the end times rejecting Babylon's wine,
It's
etc. So
Oh,
interesting. We have a lot of Catholic viewers because I will tell you something, Miles. Catholics are very interested in Adventist weirdities. They
yep.
really enjoy, and I'm sure, other people, but they're really fascinated by, this whole anti-Catholicism. But so that's kind of what we're trying to get is just give some of our viewers some of the odder things about being growing up Adventist, besides just the fact that we're vegetarian. What you're talking about would be of interest to
So
them.
here's one I always bring up to people that you really need to stop and ponder this. And people they kind of just chuckle sometimes when they hear this, but
Mhm.
I'm like, no, seriously, think about this. You want to talk about an oddity, and I'll preface by saying I know because Adventists that hear this will say that's not true. You're misrepresenting, bro.
Mhm.
And no, I'm not misrepresenting. It's a subsidiary of the SDA church, essentially, when I say this. But what other church out there has their own fake meat line? Like
That's
imagine like the Baptist Meat Packing Company or something like that. You know, like
yeah. I know.
the
right.
Vatican
My
processing plant
dad,
or like
That's right.
for a
it's
while
just an
he had his own vegetarian meat company. He was trying to, it was called Harvest Home Foods, and he did vegetarian, what was it, not tacos,
Tamales.
tamales, vegetarian
Tamales.
tamales. And it petered after a while, but I grew up, yeah, my parents weren't strict vegetarians, but we did eat all the vegetarian, and his mother would make the fake meat herself, from the gluten.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
The
right. It's very
the
odd.
gray glutinous.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what was Sabbath like in your house growing up?
Well, so my dad's a pastor.
Mhm.
So again, my experience it
Mhm.
is influenced heavily by that. So it was like we had to be there early
Mhm.
because my dad obviously usually wanted to drive together, but typically it ended up having to be separate because um,
Yeah,
stepmom's running behind or whatever it may be.
yeah.
And so we were typically there early to the church.
Mhm.
And, I'm like wandering around. I'm like, man, we got like 45 minutes. I'm like a kid. So I'm like outside, like
Yeah,
digging in the ground with a stick or something
yeah,
like
Yeah.
that, or like
yeah,
on the playground at the Adventist school because the school is
yeah,
attached to the
yeah,
church or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then typically would go home after that. But oftentimes we're having to go do like I'm having to go do my dad's pastoral duties with him. So like it could have fluctuated. Like, hey, we're going to feed the homeless. My dad had to be involved in everything that's going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
So I had to be involved in like pretty much all that stuff. Like, you're going to come along because you're my son type
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So it varied.
Yeah.
It varied, but there was no eating out or whatever. There was no watching TV. There was no
Mhm.
playing video
Right.
games,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. It was a day to be outside. It was a day to, um, my dad sometimes had to do hospital visits. So I'd go with him to hospital visits, or, um, yeah, feed the homeless. Sometimes Pathfinders was that evening. They did it like 6
Mhm.
on Saturday evenings around sundown or whatever. Um, and so it was pretty standard in that regard, but like, we weren't gonna, yeah, I mean, we weren't gonna go out to eat. We weren't gonna, we would fellowship. We'd go over to somebody's house oftentimes too. That was always fun because you never know whose food you're getting to eat.
That's right.
And you kind of learn as a kid, like, oh, we're going to this person's house.
Oh yeah. See,
Oh,
he
Yeah.
will not eat at any buffets or any.
yeah,
He does not want to ever go to potluck again.
ruins
Like
it.
he had enough.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
other thing that's real, and again, I know this isn't distinct to SDAs. I'm not saying they invented this, but they just have like their own kind of like culture around some of these things, and special K loaf.
You know what? I still actually like it.
It's like soy sauce and cottage cheese and special K
No,
cereal.
you didn't have to.
It's like one
Everybody
of
must
those
have their
things.
own.
It's like one of those things that made me wonder, even as a kid, like, who thought this up? Like,
Yeah,
who
yeah,
thought this would be a good idea? Like, to
That's
yeah.
pretty funny.
combine this, and maybe I was just getting people that didn't make it very good. But the other thing, and so I could kind of go on about a lot of like the weird kind of oddities, if you will.
Well, did you go in
Um,
gathering?
oh yeah,
Okay,
oh
you
yeah,
did go. That's where you
oh
go
yeah.
beg for money for the Adventist
Yep.
church. That's
Not
basically
just
what it
that.
is.
I didn't just do that. I also had to, I was involved in colportering.
Oh,
That's
wow.
where you not only go out and beg for money, but you go and proselytize Ellen's books,
Yeah,
basically.
Mhm.
yeah.
So they did some group colportering at one of the churches I was at. I can't remember which one it was at this point. So I grew up in a few SDA churches, uh, three or four to be specific. Yeah, 3 or 4,
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
Because my
Well,
dad at one point had like multiple churches. Multiple SDA
yeah.
churches he was pastoring locally,
Right.
that type thing.
Well, a lot of people are gonna go, oh, you just hated the Sabbath. You just you had a
Right.
miserable childhood. That's really why you're coming after Adventists now. It's because,
Always.
yeah,
That's what's
yeah,
always.
yeah,
You become immune to that. Like I said, when
yeah,
your skin is like hide leather,
yeah.
after engaging, again, answering Adventism is only a year old, but I've been doing this for over a decade now.
What were
I've been
your
involved.
other venues? How did you do that?
Well, I went to SDA University when I wasn't an Adventist.
Okay.
Okay.
So I engaged with professors, pastors.
Mhm.
I didn't start answering Adventism hastily.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, I appreciated the nice, right up there at the
Yeah.
beginning. But to some degree, I think that should come through in the content, that, we're not just like shooting spitballs over
No.
here. We're getting, and what it shows is that a lot of SDAs don't even actually know the system. They don't understand
Right.
why these
That's
sorts
right.
of things are connected. And so I didn't start this hastily, and so I was engaging with SDAs for, a long time. So it was either typically face to face, especially with college students. I mean, I probably talked with couple hundred at my time at Southern, as well as like professors, pastors, laity.
Right.
Began engaging with them online. You can find a lot of them online to
Yeah.
engage, typically in written format, but
Yeah.
that's kind of where all that started.
Yeah.
But I started answering Adventism like a year ago. So
Yeah. No, I mean, you obviously know your stuff. I mean, I wrote a book that took me, oh my word, it was like 900 pages. And the guy told me, no, you have to, the publisher said, oh no, you have to get it down to around 200. And I didn't even get, you have way more than anything I had. And so I'm very impressed with,
well, it's also 10 years of that's, again, that's what kind of why it goes back to, I didn't start this hastily.
yeah,
Because I knew I wanted to do this, but wasn't ready at the time. And I
Mhm.
sought counsel godly counsel
Yeah.
that recommended against
Yeah.
becoming overzealous and
Okay.
be taught in things like well, just like the foundations, the things that like getting catechized on like the Apostles' Creed and like these sorts of things. Because again, I was like a new convert at the time. I was pretty zealous.
Yeah.
But getting firmed up and in the process really studying it out as a system a lot better, because if you're going to reach these people, you have to be able to point these sorts of things out, because most of them don't understand this. A movement has equipped them with a way of seeing the world that's the thing in question, yet
That's
it causes all of the responses. So it's hard to like get through to a person who doesn't see that they've even been equipped with lenses that they're wearing.
Right. Yeah.
And they don't you'd end up just talking past one another because you're using a lot of the same language, but you mean entirely different things because it's informed by this great controversy theme.
Yeah. Why don't we go then, right? If you think if you're done talking about your childhood, we could just spend the whole time talking about that.
Yeah.
But are you ready to start, talking about what made you leave?
Yeah.
Okay. So go for it.
Well, so like I said, I became pretty nominal, which this is kind of a whole story in and of itself. So I kind of won't trail off into that because who knows how long or how much time I'll spend on that. But I got pretty nominal for a season. And that really did come from, well, when again, you're around the real classical Adventist teaching, what I would call the true consistent SDA teaching, it's bondage. It's not freedom.
Right.
And so because it's a bondage, it's no wonder that you eventually get to a point where you're kind of like, is this even worth it? And I've talked with, I don't know how many SDAs that felt that same way. And so in becoming nominal, I pretty much just became distracted at that point. Cause again, this is in like my teen years, like late teen years, about to turn an adult type stuff. And was pretty nominal for the most part, just more so got into like running track and sports and stuff like that. I would have still said I was a Christian, but I wouldn't have really been able to tell you much of anything. It would have just been, well, I was raised a Christian, or, oh, I believe in heaven, or one generic answer like that.
Yeah.
And so into college, I actually got mesmerized because I was never exposed up to that point to like other worldviews. And so I was really enamored when I came across Eastern religions. And so then then I got actually into Eastern religion for a while. The idea of like the higher self, the true you, we're all just kind of a part of this living organism, almost like a panentheism, if you will. But it wasn't like I was like hardcore or anything like that. That was just the sort of thing that I began to kind of identify with, if you will. And then it was in that I had a pretty radical conversion, which it was radical for me. Most people kind of hear it, and obviously to them, it's just like, well, you're just kind of hearing secondhand story, but had a pretty radical conversion at a friend's house, and essentially felt conviction over my sin in a way that I hadn't before, and actually realized if I were to die in that moment, that I would be justly under the wrath and condemnation of God. And that had a profound impact on me in actually hearing and understanding the gospel. Now, prior to this, about a year prior to this, the reason this ended up really happening is because of a seed that a friend sowed there in university when I was kind of meandering around in Eastern religions. And it was a friend who wanted to share the gospel with me while we were out eating one day. He was on the basketball team, I was on the track team. And we went out to eat, and he kind of casually, just pretty standard like crew guy, if you know what crew is at on college campuses. It's kind of like it's just like kind of like non-denominational, sort of like evangelical type outreach, if you will. So he's just like kind of like a basic crew guy. And I actually told him when he asked, I said, well, I actually know what that is. And so in my mind, I'm thinking Adventism when I hear gospel. And he said, I didn't expect this, because I kind of just expected us to kind of transition on after that. Because especially too, when you're not super like vocal about religion and politics, those tend to be like the two things that you kind of just get uncomfortable when people bring them up.
That's right.
And so I kind of had that going on, and I didn't expect him to actually say back, Well, can you share it with me? And I was like, oh,
Comfortable.
well, I like proceeded to fumble along, basically stuff about God vindicating his character, because that's the
Yeah,
central
yeah,
theme of the
yeah.
is that like the problem for evil and all that sort of stuff is all stemmed kind of from that central hinge. And so I went on to explain probably a lot less eloquently, just because now I've been immersed in it a lot more, but kind of fumbled my way along through explaining like the end times being here and the Sabbath, and like mentioned these sorts of things. And he actually stopped me in like the middle of the presentation. He said, "Can I actually just share something else with you?" And so
Good,
he like
good for him.
pulled out his Bible, and it just explained like the simplicity of uh well, like just like the goodness of Christ, and like aspects of redemption, new creation, these sorts of things, of like bringing life, these sorts of words that I don't feel like were really uh hot button words that you really heard a lot in Adventism.
Yeah, yeah.
And those sorts of things kind of stuck, like being born again, being regenerated.
Mhm.
Because I had this view of a monist. All I am is a breath and a body.
Mhm.
And when that breath and body separates, it's just,
Yeah.
there's nothing dead about a person. There's nothing that needs changed. It's like behavior modification that really needs to take place in the Adventist system. Well, these sorts of things that he was explaining to me from scripture really resonated with me, but that had stuck in my mind leading up to the point of conversion. Well, I know people may hear this and think, well, after something like that, how could you then be tempted to go back to Adventism? We have to think, when people are like a babe in the faith, they
Mhm.
don't really know a lot.
Mhm.
You don't know the technical term to these things. You tend to be real
Sure.
zealous. You got to tell everyone you're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
take on the world, that
Yeah,
type
yeah.
thing. But you're like as bold as like a paper tiger, but like you have a switchblade comb as like a weapon to even be able to defend
Yeah,
yourself.
Yeah, that's
So I
right.
was in like that phase,
yeah.
and was all these deep-seated SDA things after having this
Right.
experience.
Yeah.
I thought, well, I got to go back to the last day church, because mainly I was thinking things about the Sabbath,
Yeah.
because the big fear I had was being in a church on a Sunday.
That's
That I
right.
definitely
Yeah.
was paranoid
Oh,
about.
yeah. I
And
can.
so I wanted to start attending church, and so I lived like in the middle of nowhere at the time, middle of nowhere, Illinois. And by the middle of nowhere, I mean literally the middle of nowhere, like population 70.
Wow.
How old were you again?
At this point,
When
yeah,
you're
at this
yeah,
point, 19.
19. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm actually living in this middle of nowhere town in Illinois. And so the closest big town to us was a Catholic town. My mom worked at the Catholic hospital. And so that was like the predominant thing around
Yeah.
there. And I'm
Yeah.
like, well, I'm terrified to go to like a church on a Sunday. So I started studying these things, is what I'm getting at. And so I had to study this stuff. And in studying the stuff, I started to realize that things just did not seem correct with Adventism. So I
Right.
kind of went down the rabbit hole. I didn't come across a lot of like Walter Ray and Dale Ratzlaff
Mhm.
and Des Ford, like any of the defectors, or even like Canwright.
Mhm.
I started getting online, and not even looking in like echo chambers, but like on forums, discussions about the Sabbath, that type stuff.
Right. Right.
Um, and it was through doing a ton of that
Mhm.
that the things started to pile up, and I realized, okay, well, Adventism is not correct. But then it got worse, because then I started to realize, because I was trying to connect the dots between something happened and I didn't experience that in Adventism, and I'm not seeing what they're saying in scripture like they claim is just plainly there.
Mhm.
And a lot of these things are rooted in a bunch of conspiracies that don't really have like actual foundation. Like the Pope didn't change the Sabbath.
Right.
These sorts of things, like it's just not true. That's just
Mhm.
literally not true at all.
And that's just
Um,
not one denomination saying that. That's every single non-Adventist since Christianity began would say, well, I mean, obviously not since Christianity began, but almost. Catholics didn't change the Sabbath. That's not a Catholic thing.
Yeah, well, and like I bring this up all the time because you guys talk about addressing them systematically. And it's like to do that, that's the other thing that like some people kind of get off put by my demeanor. And I get that I'm not, you can't please all people. No matter what approach you take, you're
Yeah.
always going to have people that
Yeah.
it's not their flavor. So I'm just going to be, how I'm going to be. And so, but I lost my train of thought.
No, I think you're great. I think God uses so many different types of people.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Go.
Sorry, I was just going to say they quote. So people don't understand that, like, when you're doing what we're doing, I have to read like their scholars and see what their scholars are saying. Like, what are their defenses? These types of things. Well, when you do that, you come across who they try to cite for support for things like this. So, like, one example is they love to quote Philip Schaff. They love Philip Schaff, Dr. Schaff, which a lot of, I don't consider Adventism Protestant, but Protestants tend to love Dr. Schaff.
Right.
And so they try to follow suit with that. And they oftentimes will try to try and cite Schaff. Yet, if you read Schaff on this is a perfect example. Schaff explicitly says the apostles. That's what this goes back to. There was he says people trying to ascribe things to Constantine and they overplay their hand and create all sorts of problems. And all they do is evidence they don't know history. So when you start coming across stuff like that was the one group growing up that I was never taught like at home to be like super fearful of Roman Catholics, but I do remember asking my dad because there was a family in the neighborhood. They were Roman Catholics and they played with us as neighborhood kids. And I remember asking my dad one time, "What do Roman Catholics believe?" And he said, "Well, they believe some different things than we do." That's kind of as far as it went. And it's interesting because that always stuck with me. It stuck with me a lot because then when I got to, well, in just an age where my hobby is like theology, so it kind of is a nice crossover with this platform. Digging into a lot of that stuff, it kind of proved that Adventism just doesn't know what they're talking about. Like they have a problem with representing, whether it's Protestants, Catholics, you could even put Orthodox in that category, despite the differences, because to them it's just one broad sweep, it's just all the same. But when you start to like study those things and actually hear what it kind of goes back to Arthur, what you were saying earlier about the fear of like everything is a mine. Well, it has to be that way to keep you from actually hearing what other people believe because it's going to disprove what you're saying. And they don't have to do that in that world. Like you get to just believe the talking points and be insulated. And you don't have to actually learn what other people are saying or believe. You don't have to agree with them, but at least hear what they're saying. That's why we try to use so many source documents to say, I'm not just saying this. This is what the sources are saying. I don't know any higher place to go than the pioneers, Ellen White, the president, Ted Wilson, their website, their magazines. This is their official organ that's saying these things. So I think that's part of the reason why they don't want you doing that is you're going to quickly see that like anyone that's objective to depends what area we're talking about. But when it comes to like history, it just, if you're just objective about it, it's just very easy to see. You just have to choose to believe conspiracy over and against just facts.
Well, and I don't want to get off into a rabbit trail because I'm enjoying your story, but have you noticed that when you really actually confront a Seventh-day Adventist on what they believe, they'll quickly make it come all the way down to, well, I believe in the seventh day. That's it. In other words, well, I don't really believe in Ellen White. Well, I don't. That's and it seems like, yeah, but the reason I'm an Adventist is because of the Sabbath. That's it. I mean, have you found that?
Well, 100%. And that again goes back to the system that right now is the heralding of the third angel's message, which includes the seventh-day Sabbath, the final warning herald message. Actually, technically, there's the fourth angel's message of Revelation 18, but the third angel's message includes the seventh-day Sabbath and the health message. Those are the two things. So that's why those are the two things that people tend to know about them. And again, when the focus of that third angel's message for them, I don't agree with this obviously, but it is that the seventh-day Sabbath is going to be the seal of God. The seal of God is quickly coming because the time of trouble is coming. So there is an undergirded, I feel security because I'm a part of the right organization.
Right. That's
because it's a la carte across the board, but you find a lot of these little nuggets of things that are consistent, and the great controversy worldview being one of them.
Yeah.
The Sabbath being another one of them. The health message, not as much. There's definitely a bigger spectrum on that, but you're not going to find a Seventh-day Adventist that's going to church on Sunday. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
it's like universal. And so,
Although some of the Seventh Adventist churches around here do rent out their
yeah,
churches
my dad did that
for
in
percentages,
Chattanooga.
which I find that interesting. But okay, let's go back to your conversion. Let's finish
Yeah,
that.
well, I mean that's kind of like it in a nutshell. I had a pretty radical conversion. Was tempted to go back to Adventism for about like a year and a half. Ironically enough, that middle of nowhere place that I lived at in Illinois, there was an SDA church about 30 minutes from there.
Okay.
Oh,
They
wow.
planted one, and so about a year and a half or so, and at that point, I realized because again, I did have a lot of those sort of like fear tentacles that kind of still had a grip on like, well, what if they are right? You know,
Yeah.
what if the Sunday law
Oh
comes?
yeah.
Well, I'll go, and then if the Sunday law comes, I'll just stop going. You know, then I'll know.
That's right.
But once you start, and again, when I say I had a radical conversion, I mean I had a very radical conversion. I had a hunger for the Word of God now that I didn't have before. I started reading the Bible like crazy. That doesn't mean I obviously understood or had like a sound hermeneutic in doing so. I just was hungry and I was like devouring this down and kind of just getting like fed up on the milk of like scripture. I
Yeah.
read through the
Yeah.
whole Bible in like a month's time. I had nothing to do. I
Oh.
again at that time I'd moved back in with my mother and it was in like the middle of nowhere. And so I just had a hunger for this. And so that was kind of fueling some of these sorts of things. And so after about a year and a half of that sort of thing, as well as I got plugged into a group in the Catholic town that I was telling you about 30 minutes away, where I just started having like Christian fellowship, if you will, which
Yeah.
just became huge as well, because just being around, that's when you start to see those sorts of things of like, these people aren't weird or like they're not like, well, the image that's painted is like these people are going to be the people that are going to round you up one day,
That's right.
like this sort of stuff. And it's just
Yeah.
like, well,
Yeah.
I don't understand. Like, what's going to happen? Like, they're just going to, I'm like, 19, 20 at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking stuff like, so like these people are all of a sudden going to be the people that just like turn, like what's going to happen? Like a switch is going to be flipped.
Yeah.
Why these people don't seem to care anything about Seventh-day Adventists. Shoot, half of them don't even know what Adventism is. They're like, I don't even know what that is. So it just didn't, a lot of things just did not make sense. So
Well, you
eventually I
didn't
had
hear
to,
Cliff Goldstein explain that?
oh,
Is
I
one
didn't,
time I didn't know that either. I was like,
Yeah.
what's good? But he actually said one time that that it was going to be because some Adventists are going to become very, very bad, and
yeah,
then
that's what
we'll
Ellen White
deserve
said.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's what Alan. Well,
okay.
we're
He must have
former
right.
Adventists are supposedly, according to the
Yeah.
system, former Adventists are going to be some of the worst ones.
Yeah.
And they'll try and point to father against, son, mother
Yeah.
against daughter type things. And yeah, it just
Yeah.
no.
Right. Right.
So that was kind of my conversion in like a nutshell. And so
Okay.
I just started going to like a local church in my area. And from there, I mean, just have kind of remained pretty fired up. I was
Well,
in like a
how did that go with your family, your Adventist family? What did they?
yeah. So my mom is in more of like the nominal lane,
Okay.
if you will. So like she's not like conservative SDA. She grew up, her dad was an Adventist pastor. And this is kind of like a whole story in and of itself. So I won't open like that whole can of worms, but that definitely impacted her, view of Seventh-day Adventism as well growing up. And so her and my dad, my parents are divorced, had a very different sort of, view regarding Adventism, if you will. So that also gave me a unique aspect with Adventism to where while I was at my dad's, I was very involved and very immersed in the Adventist world and bubble with summer camp schools, all that sort of stuff. But at my mom's, my mom had like establishment outside of the Adventist world in reality,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah.
And so because that was the case at like through like my teen years, I got to also experience um just more of like I wouldn't say like living in the world, because it wasn't like my mom was just like a non-Christian household, or like we went to church and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But it was definitely not like surrounded in the Adventist bubble. So that sort of stuff I think really impacted my experience just through, yeah, like my young adult to really, or my like youth to like young adult years. So
Did you
it was a
have
little
a
bit different
moment?
for me because I had a little bit of a
Yeah. But
experience outside of the bubble.
do you have a moment where you sat your dad down and said, Dad, I'm no longer a Seventh Adventist?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I don't think I fully answered your question there. That's my fault.
No, no.
Yeah. So at that point, I'm like already an adult and living out on my own.
Right,
So it wasn't like as like, like a 14-year-old, like a rebellious
right.
14-year-old.
Yeah, right.
I never really like sat him down, other than like him and I have had, I mean, hours and hours and hours and hours. I mean, there's one time I remember I had to go, and it was like almost 2 a.m. and we were like debating theology. So hours and hours and hours of discussion. So it's one of those type things
Yeah,
of
yeah.
hearing. It wasn't like, hey, I need to sit you down, that
So he
that
knew
sort
it
of
was
thing.
coming.
No, totally, because we were talking and batting stuff back and forth theologically, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm just not seeing this. So it's like clearly the
Yeah,
indication is when you say I'm not seeing
right.
this to like 20 of the central SDA
Yeah,
beliefs, it's kind
yeah,
of indicative that,
yeah,
well, especially too when you're saying stuff like, well, the big one is the Sabbath. I mean,
yeah,
they think if they prove, I was just talking with some people about this today, actually, they think if they prove that the Sabbath, the seventh day Sabbath, is binding, that validates Adventism.
yeah,
Right.
But
yeah.
it doesn't.
Uh-uh.
Like, not even close.
Yeah,
We could concede that, and I would still have so many issues, so many problems. You guys are not Trinitarian. It's not the Trinity. This heavenly
right.
trio thing is not the
Yeah,
Trinity. They resurrected a bunch of ancient heresies. Like, there's just so many problems.
yeah,
1844, Ellen White, it just so many problems. And so, but for some reason, again, just because it's hammered on as like the seal of God,
yeah.
the end times, it's going to be this dividing line, etc.
Mm.
Mhm.
You just kind of carry some of them more than you do other ones. So
Yeah. Well, okay, there might be people right now listening and watching that kind of want to know, is when you do leave, is it going to be as scary? And I mean, in other words, we're scared to death to leave. And then when we left, and it was like, wow, that wasn't near as hard. I mean, it might have been some emotional problems, but our families didn't, our families didn't kick us out or shun us. So did you have, just for the people listening that need kind of a help, what's that? Is it going to be as bad as they think?
Yeah.
well, it depends in what sense, I guess, because I don't know everybody's family dynamic,
Yeah,
etc. My
yeah.
family didn't do that.
Okay,
They
yeah,
didn't
because
like
I think
disown me
most
or
don't.
like shun me or anything
Yeah,
like that. But I know that there are a lot of people, and I know these people, whether it be personally or they've contacted us, and we're like trying to walk through these sorts of
mhm,
things with them. Um, their dynamics are just, they've been set up by this organization in the way that I really think the organization wants to set people up, where it's like a one-stop shop. And so when you've been in the one-stop shop for 27 years,
mhm,
30 years,
mhm.
if that's your situation, it's probably going to be a lot more difficult because it's
Mhm.
all you've ever known, and you may
Yeah,
not have any connections outside of that. So that's kind of what
that's
I was going
right.
back to. And like my experience was, it was a godsend that my mother was not confined to the SDA bubble,
Yeah,
because it allowed me to have to engage with the scary world, and people that thought differently than I did, and,
mhm, yeah,
and those sorts of things. And like um that just, that shapes you, especially in your formative years. So I'm cautious when I say that it's not as bad probably as you're thinking, even given your circumstances, but that will probably be subjective based on your circumstances, if
yeah.
that makes
Well,
sense.
and okay, if you leave Adventism and you're going to God, It's going to be a different, because God's going to be there. He is
Yep.
going to be helping you through this. God is going to help you through this, and even the hard parts. I mean, his love, there's always, no matter what trauma we're going through, when you have God right there helping you through it, it's just not going to be that bad. But I have seen kids who are leaving Adventism then they give up God. And so I can't even imagine what that's like. But there's going to be a difference if you cling to God as you leave versus having nothing. You're not going towards anything. I mean, there
Yep.
are a lot of Adventists who leave Adventism. They never take their name off the rolls.
Yep.
And what they do is they just kind of settle for nothing for the rest of their life. They don't want to go forward, but they don't want to go backward. And I've met a lot of those.
Mhm.
So anyway, okay,
Right.
go ahead, continue.
Well, I was just going to say that I was going to chime in on that I think Adventism really is like, so in my engagement at this point, we're talking thousands of
Yeah.
Seventh-day Adventists. I mean, at least. And in my experience, there are typically two paths that
Mhm.
people go.
Mhm.
It's very rare in my experience that people leave Adventism into the universal church, like the Christian church.
Mhm.
It tends to be you become hardcore, I'm all in on Adventism, and you
Mhm.
go that path,
Mhm.
which that could be all in on a certain flavor of Adventism.
Right. Mhm.
But either way, you're like really into it,
Mhm.
or you're not, and you become an unbeliever, like an atheist. You get into agnosticism, atheism, and it produces that. It's like set up to essentially do that because, again, it's bondage. It's not freedom. There's
Mhm.
so much of their errors come back to their faulty understanding of the nature of man.
Seventh-day Adventists are one of a handful of Protestant denominations that believe Christians should rest on the seventh day, like ancient Israel and the Jews do today. They base this belief on the Ten Commandments. In addition, they believe the seventh-day Sabbath is the only day God set aside as a special day of worship. Adventists teach that in AD 321, the Roman Emperor Constantine issued an edict declaring Sunday as the day of Christian worship, and that the Catholic Church caved to the emperor's edict by shifting the sacred day from the seventh to the first day of the week. But did the Catholic Church really change the Sabbath day to Sunday? Is there really more to the story? We begin a new series that will be exploring the answers to those questions. We will start at the beginning, from Genesis to Mount Sinai, to the life of Christ, to the Reformation, through the 17th century Sabbath wars, all the way to the end of the world. We will be telling the epic tale of this holy day. This is the story of the Sabbath.
That's what allows them. Well, we were just talking earlier that they think that if the Sabbath is proven, and I don't know how much of this you've seen on my channel, I talk about this a lot, but new creation. I mean, the new creation
We watch you a
absolutely
lot.
obliterates
Yeah,
the
That's right.
idea of the seventh-day Sabbath. But
Absolutely.
they're not equipped for this. I don't know if you saw recently, I showed that I did a video on fallacies where I was just like, hey, if you're going to engage with SDAs apologetically, which is our goal to equip people to be able to reach these people, be on the lookout for these fallacies. Like after 10 years of doing this, you're going to run into these. I run into them literally every week. The new creations, one of their favorite ones to use what's the genetic fallacy. Like, oh, that's wrong because that's Roman Catholic. That's what, well, you're just assuming that that's not coming from the Bible. Why not deal with the Bible? Is the virgin birth wrong now? Well, no, that's clearly in Scripture. Well, so is the new creation. So let's stick with that, and let's just deal with but that system can't it can't deal with stuff like that, and it's unfortunate because that's when you don't understand the new creation, you don't really understand redemption. you don't really understand all of this. And so it makes sense that that system is producing those sorts of effects on people because it's not actually giving you, well, a Second Corinthians 5:17, you're actually understanding being made a new creature in Christ, the body of Christ, these sorts of things, and having to be fearful of everyone who doesn't look exactly like I do, doesn't believe exactly. Because Arthur, sorry, I know I'm kind of going along here, but
No,
you said
go. We
something.
like
You
it.
said
That's why
something
you're
early.
here.
You said something early on as well that like really resonated with me, just around how everything in Adventism is seen as orthodoxy. There's no, like, you can't differ on this at all. Everything has to be believed
That's right.
to a T because
That's
that's
right.
how that system is built. Again, this gets back to why I am so systematic in the approach of showing like all this stuff in their system is predicated upon a faulty foundation. It's not like, again, I mean, they reject creeds, for example. Like they don't affirm the Apostles' Creed. There's no level of like any sort of foundational unity. It's
Mhm.
just everything is foundational unity because
That's
if
right.
not, the whole thing collapses. And
That's
so
right.
Christianity is not like that. And so it's like when you start to learn things like this, for the person in the audience that's listening, that's like fearful, you just at a certain point you got to do it. You just got to make the decision and trust, like Teresa was saying, that God is with you. Trust that God is going to lead you, and do it, and you will be led. And once you grow and start learning some of these things, you can actually look back on it and laugh. Like I look back on a lot of things and I just kind of chuckle, and I laugh like, oh man, so funny how I used to think like this or think
Yeah.
that, or like these sorts of funny things. There's also too there's a number of Facebook groups out there as well that people can join to like bounce questions off of, because that was the other thing. When I was leaving, there was like virtually nothing. There was like Dale Ratzlaff on YouTube.
That's
And
right.
that was like it. And so now there's like way more stuff
Right.
out there. I mean, you guys have got a channel going. EJ Thunder's books are out there.
Yeah.
You got Dale Ratzlaff, you got Steve Daly, you've got Answering Adventism, you got Former Adventist Podcast, you've got Peter Dixon at SDA Q&A. I mean, there's so many places where you can just like, because I know it was helpful for me when I heard other people
Oh,
who
yeah.
did, because I didn't
Oh,
see
yeah.
anybody else around me,
Yeah.
that really had done that. And what I heard about people who did that was like they're apostatizing
Mhm.
That's right.
the wrath that's coming, that's
Yeah.
going to come down on you. You had all this extra light that, other people didn't get, and you're going to be
That's right.
accountable for that, all these sorts of things. And so,
Yeah, we're gonna all be
um,
smoking. We're gonna all be smoking and
That's right.
yeah. Have you
eating
seen like,
a wild.
that's the thing that's interesting too about, we talked about the art earlier. There's one of their pieces where it's like, I can't remember the title exactly. It's something like when they realize it's too late. And it's a scene. If I were able to find it and show it to you, you'd be like, oh yeah, I've seen that 100%. It's like a standard SDA one. And it's very telling when you analyze it, because all the people that were taken to go with Jesus are gone. And all that's left are not like Muslims, not Buddhists,
Yeah.
not, no. People with cross necklaces, but they're wearing jewelry.
Yeah.
They've
Oh
got
yeah.
earrings
That's
on,
right.
Yeah.
and they're
That's right.
and they've got, they don't
Yeah.
have long sleeves on. They have like the ladies have short sleeves on,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Ooh.
like these sorts of things to indicate like the people who it's too late, they're fearful now.
Yeah.
But you can clearly tell they're depicted as Christians.
That's
Yeah.
right.
It's
They're the
Christians.
Aunt Bees. They're the Aunt Bees with the little. They go to church on Sunday, and I don't know if
Yes.
you've ever seen what's
Andy Griffith.
Andy Griffith, but they come
Yeah.
out of their
Oh
little
yeah.
church on Sunday and happy Sabbath.
Yeah.
That's what they say. She's got her little earrings on.
Correct.
Oh my word! Stay away.
Yeah. Well, that's
She's the
yeah.
one that's going to be left.
I know, but it's telling. It's like that's the sort of like, it gets back to those like undertones that I think, while you may not, to people that say, oh, it's changed. And it may have changed for you. You may have changed. But
Yeah.
the Answering Adventism, for example, only deals with the organization. We care about the organization's stated positions, and those have not changed.
Right.
So I don't want to be affiliated with an organization. Well, and we talked about this, for example, a little bit last time. I've been back in the weeds on this, trying to do some more digging for some content on this. And actually, you may be able to help me out on this, Teresa, because I'm having some trouble finding some stuff. But the abortion issue, for example, the real like wishy-washy sort of loophole that's left there.
Well,
And again, this goes back to the nature of man issue.
yeah. Well, the Adventists, I can't tell you, I was very big into it before I left, which was 20 years ago. So I don't have any recent statistics, but what I can tell you is what they've done. And, but the real quick thing I could say right now is that in every single one of their Seventh-day Adventists believe and all the updates, I think there's been like 3 revisions since every single one of them has in there that Adventists believe a child does not become a living soul till their first breath.
Yep.
It's in the, I wish I had it, I could show you.
I know what you're talking about.
And it says in there, so before the child takes their first breath, they're not a living soul. And so until they change that, no matter what they say, as far as how pro-life they say they are, until they change that, they're fundamentally wrong about the human spirit, and they're going to have people who will justify killing unborn children because of that.
Yep. And there's theories out there. Again, I won't make content on like speculation. And so I don't know if I'll ever end up making content on this if I can find more information, but there's buzz and speculation that it has to do with them receiving benefits, because it's predominantly in like California, receiving financial benefits from allowing abortions at their hospitals, and then finding ways to justify it, like their really wishy-washy statement, which I don't know if I'm sure you've read that. Have you read the most recent statement on?
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it does. It goes back to not having a proper understanding of humanity.
Right. Well, I would suggest for recent stuff, Andrew Michelle on his YouTube channel, he's going to be the one that's going to have the more recent facts and figures about how many abortions the Adventist hospitals have done. But they're right now, okay, but I know this, what is happening is, and this is from, again, this is just going to be anecdotal, but there have been nurses that have come to me and told me this, that what they're doing is the Adventist doctors, OBGYNs, are saying, well, we're not going to do an abortion here in the Adventist hospital, but we're going to go over to the clinic that doesn't have an Adventist name on it. It's not affiliated with the church, but all Adventists are going to do it. In other words, they're in off-site private abortion clinics. So they're still doing it. They're just not doing it with the church involved in the church facilities. So that's what I have heard from multiple sources. Yeah. So,
well, I will report back if I find any information. I try to sleuth on a lot of the stuff, and so this is, as I say, this topic in particular is hard to find more information on. They've really tried to button this up. I will tell you, I don't know if you saw, I put up a short Saturday because they updated their website on the Trinity. And I knew that this would now impact my, I have to keep up on stuff like this. When you're engaging with SDAs constantly, they're going to refer to the website, the fundamental beliefs. And I got an email. I show this in the short. I got an email about over a year ago. It was like right when my channel was fresh. And I got an email from an SDA pastor who said he felt like I wasn't being charitable toward them regarding the Trinity. And he wanted me, he said, we're Trinitarians, bro. And I said, okay, why does your website say that we believe that God is 3 beings?
Yeah, I remember you talking
work in harmony as a team.
Yeah.
God's not a team. That's not the Trinity. That's not possible. You guys are, you need to go back and walk through history and realize you're just rehashing up stuff it's already been dealt with. This has already been dealt with. This is not up for debate. Well, he told me that was a slip of a keystroke. He said he contacted somebody at the GC, and I said, I got to be honest with you, man. Why? Well, he said something else too about he thought that I was a theology student.
Mhm.
He thought
Yeah.
I got my degree in theology from an Adventist university.
Mhm, mhm.
He said something about that in there. And I said, well, one, I'm not. I'm an armchair theologian.
Mhm.
But that leads me to my second point. Why did it take an armchair theologian for you to not realize that you have damnable heresy on your
Mhm.
website
Yeah.
when you claim to be Trinitarians?
Yeah.
That's not just a slip of a keystroke.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's
that's
like
horrible. Yeah.
it's just you're saying you're polytheists. That's what you're saying when you say that.
Yeah.
I know they
Yeah.
would never admit that, but that's what you're saying when you
But
say
you
that.
know, I never heard the Trinity when I grew up in the Seventh Day. Nobody
No.
discussed the
Never talked
Trinity.
about it.
There was no in our Bible classes in elementary school and in high school and college. They never discussed the Trinity with us, and so I didn't know when I left. I didn't know what the common understanding of the Trinity was. It was actually one of the Lutheran satire sites that I think you know about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really funny that actually made me think about it. And that was in the last 5 or 6 years. I was
Yeah.
like, you know what? I never even thought about what the actual Trinitarian concept is. But yeah, Adventists, I think, just don't know. I don't think that's really been on their radar because they're so
It's not
busy
important.
with
So
the three angels message. You know,
Yeah, exactly. And they don't realize, like, oftentimes when they want to argue, sometimes I take different strategies. It kind of depends on my mood, I
uh,
think,
uh,
and like the person.
yeah,
But one thing I love to, whenever they go on about, well, the Sabbath, they're going to talk about the law and the Sabbath, the law and the Sabbath.
yeah,
And so one of my go-tos with them whenever they go on this is, well, before we can even discuss this, who is God? Because you're talking about his law, but
yeah, yeah,
who are you talking about?
yeah,
And we get into that, and then I explain to them, well, see, this is foundational. You want to argue the law of a being who, well, in your guys' case, because then when they end up getting into describing it, it's like, no, you guys, you have a view that is influenced by Ellen White, because this kind of gets back to, sorry, my short,
yeah.
where I explained to him, well, person and being are not the same thing, and he said, well, we're gonna I talked to the guys at the GC, they
Mhm.
said they're gonna update it. And I said, "Oh, that's great to hear. I would love for them to,
Yeah.
affirm and change their position. And if you're going to do that, just you may as well just say we affirm the Nicene Creed,
Yeah.
instead of
Oh,
trying to be some
interesting.
like, whatever."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, we're not going to do that because we want to mirror the language from our fundamental beliefs book. It's just
Mhm.
going to say three persons." And I
Mhm.
said, "Well, what's it going to say about the being of God? Because being and person are not the same thing. Like
Mhm.
this cup has, I told him, I said, I have a cup in my hand. This cup has being, but it doesn't have personhood. Well, God is one singular being, shared and expressed in three persons who are
Mhm.
co-equal, co-eternal. So is it going to say, what's it going to say about the being?" He said, well, we're not going to use that language because that's not the language in the fundamental beliefs book. And I said, well, no, what you're really getting at is you're not going to update it because that's the way Ellen White interchangeably used the words person and being. And he
Mhm.
said, well, I don't believe that's true. Can you show me that? So I sent him the quotes and he said, well, that's interesting.
Huh.
And I said, no, man,
Oh.
it's not interesting. It says beings because it's not wrong. That's what they teach. You use the terms interchangeably. Well, fast forward to a year and it's been updated. And it
Mhm.
says three persons now, but nothing about being. And
Mhm.
so I anticipate a lot of SDAs are now going to appeal to, no, no, no. See, we believe three persons, just like you guys.
Okay, well now we have a very different experience with Adventists. We've got a lot of Adventists that are going full-fledged rejecting the Trinity as Catholic.
Yep.
They
Yep.
are
There's a big
saying,
push on that right now
young
too.
and old, that are just saying, you know what? The early Adventist pioneers were not Trinitarian in that.
No, they were
I'm not
Arian
even sure what they would
heretics.
call the Trin
The,
go ahead.
the heavenly trio.
Okay, right.
And not just that, but the early pioneers were Arian heretics. All of them.
Yeah.
Uriah Smith, James White, they came from the Christian Connection. Their
Mhm.
statements, we've gone over this over and over and over on the channel. Um, they openly reject. I mean, we've looked at their pioneers, even their modern scholars.
Mhm.
Their modern scholars, Jerry Moon, he's a chair of church history at Andrews University.
Mhm.
His paper, The Quest for a Biblical Trinity, he basically says we can call ourselves Trinitarian because in essence we affirm a form of a Trinity. But
Mhm.
he says we outright and openly reject creedal Trinitarianism because, and then he appeals to the pioneers and he says because the pioneers, mainly Ellen White, claimed that that God seemed very impersonal. The God of the creed that she was raised with, which was the Nicene Creed
Right.
in the
Sure.
Methodist Church, she said felt very impersonal and it didn't make sense to them. Well, she married James White, and James and Uriah Smith came out of the Christian Connection. The Christian Connection was a uh, Unitarian restorationist group.
Mhm.
So they rejected the idea of the eternality of the Son, that the
Right.
Son is almighty, that the Holy Spirit is actually personal. At the time, they were essentially, you had like almost like a monarchian
Mhm.
idea going on of like the Father alone is God and he's the Almighty. But then it transitioned as they come through Millerism into Seventh day Adventism, where it's like, well, you had some schism amongst them of like, well,
Yeah.
Uriah Smith is saying he had a beginning. James White says, well, he didn't technically because it was so far back in the past that he was generated that it basically seems like eternal. And it's like, man, are we reliving in the 19th century in this portion like second and third century? It's
Mhm.
just like
Wow.
it's just like
Yeah.
a restoration of like
Well,
these.
Wow.
yeah, because the Adventists that we're encountering, because we still encounter a lot of Adventists, they are the people that are interested in the Trinity. They are becoming Arian, and it's
Yep.
very shocking for me to see all these Adventists who are moving into Arianism.
Because of
And
the pioneers.
yeah,
The
very,
pioneers openly taught. Some of them were full blown Arians, like Uriah Smith, James
Mhm.
White, and others were semi Arians.
Mhm.
And again, I mean, we have looked at this a lot on Answering Adventism. All the sources on our website. I mean, it is quote after quote after quote after quote after quote
Mhm.
after quote.
Yeah,
And again, quote after quote, where the Holy Spirit is not even a person. And
right.
still, it's still they only tacked that on in the later periods. I mean, you're talking the movement's up and running after its incorporation, not even including the hidden years of 40,
Yeah.
43,
Yeah,
44 through 63. We're talking up to like uh the 80s, the 1880s,
yeah.
where the personhood of the Holy Spirit. Okay, the Holy Spirit is a person, but even still, Jesus isn't omnipresent. He's
Mhm.
present by means of the Holy Spirit. Like
Mhm.
it's a total mess in that area. And so
Yeah. Did
But
did you ever hear in Adventist elementary school anything about the Holy
no,
Spirit?
they never talked
I
about,
mean, to us,
they never
yeah,
talked about the
you know
Trinity.
how we
That
talk
would have
about
been,
grace,
that would have been in the early 70s.
70s and stuff.
Never,
Yeah,
never
no one
talked
ever
about
talked
that.
about this Holy Spirit. And if you did, it was more like this a grace feeling, just
yeah.
like this an actual
Yeah.
spirit, like the spirit of
It's just
the
like they say
Savior or
about
something.
inspiration. When they use the
Yeah.
word inspiration, they mean motivation.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, you were motivated to do it. Like he's an inspired. I've heard them all the time. They'll say that pastor's
Yeah.
inspired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they think that they use that word like motivated. They say that
Yeah.
same thing about spirit. It's not like
Mhm.
the Holy Spirit being a person, but like
Right. Yeah.
it's like yeah, like a something that like wells up in you like a feeling
Mhm.
Right.
that makes you feel a certain way.
Right.
And that's like the presence of God in his physical
Yeah.
absence
Mhm.
type thing,
Yeah.
which is also very similar to their Jehovah's Witness cousins
Yeah.
Right.
back in Millerism, who have a
Yeah.
very impersonal view of God's spirit
Yeah.
being like an impersonal force.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But
So
there was never anything about
I have
no,
a
I was
question.
never taught anything about the Trinity.
So what do you think? Why is it so difficult for Adventists to even, you have them that just drop out of the church and just go away.
Yeah.
They just disappear. But to what makes it so difficult for them to leave? What is that? What's the element that
Well, I
you
think that's
see?
like the nature of deception. That like if it were easy, more of them would probably do it. And I think it gets into like what you find, or at least in my experience, again, this is kind of anecdotal here, but it's a large sampling size. It tends to be the people that have struggled the most tend to be generational, which gives you insight into they were probably being taught this at a very early age, which then speaks into their psyche and their worldview is built upon all of this. And so I was trying to think about it from a great controversy worldview, which I had. So I can relate to that, which is also part of the reason I started answering Adventism.
Mhm.
Um, and when you have that worldview, it everything that is like an actual escape hatch is actually blanketed over as a deception.
Yeah.
The thing that's actually the answer is painted as being demonic, and so that just gets reinforced.
Mhm.
No matter what path you try to take, whether it's questioning, like I've talked about this a number of times. I felt like there was oftentimes a discouraged mentality around like asking difficult questions. Like in Adventist University, for example, I wasn't even being obnoxious. Ellen White has a quote in Desire of Ages where she says that Jesus actually, after the resurrection, she's
Mhm.
commenting on John 20. So this is considered inspired interpretation. Jesus had to secretly go off to heaven, which is why he sent the Marys away and told them not to worship him or cling to him, because he didn't know if his sacrifice was accepted yet, and he had to hear it from the lips of the Father. So he secretly went off to heaven, heard that from the Father, and then it says he entered back into a sin-stained world to relay that information for 40 days to then ascend, and then he's going to come again. Well, I pointed out in class, I said, hey, that would make this was an assigned reading in that class. I said, hey, this would make Ellen White saying she'd be saying that this is Jesus's third coming.
That's
Because
right.
like his second
Yeah.
coming would have been when
Yeah.
he returned to the
Yeah.
world,
That's right.
and he would have had to ascend to do that.
That's
So
right. Just because
there
it's
were two,
secret doesn't mean it, yeah.
yeah, that it wasn't an ascension. And like, so were there two ascensions? Well, he told me we'll talk about that after class. We have to move
Yeah.
along because he
Yeah.
said it's a bit of a well, he said it was a bit of a deep answer. So I'm like, okay. Well, when I go to talk to him after class, he requests that I not ask questions like that.
Oh my goodness.
So it's like when there's stuff like that going on, there's a sort of mentality that people are going to have. Because when I asked that, it was silent for about 5 seconds. You could hear a pin drop,
Yeah.
and then a kid broke the silence, and he said, "That's interesting because I was thinking that same thing."
Oh,
So
interesting.
I don't know if that made that professor nervous. They
Yeah.
claim to have answers for this. I've read them. It's like, dude, this doesn't change anything
Yeah.
that was said. But nevertheless, when I think things like when stuff like that is a reality, I think that kind of it just really pulls people and causes them to
Right.
struggle to realize that they have a lens and a worldview and a paradigm that they've been given that even when they leave, they tend to take with them, which is why oftentimes they just go into full blown atheism because they think, well, if Adventism's Christianity, I want nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
like there's no life giving, nothing there.
Yeah.
It's just real. Yeah, I mean, there's just a number of issues, obviously. And so I think that they then take that worldview with them, not knowing, and then they're associating that still with like, that is Christianity if you want Christianity, because all those other ones out there, they're apostates.
Mhm.
The Sunday, at least the Adventist Church, they've got
Right.
the three angels message. Those
Right.
sorts of things I think still linger for a person, even if they end up rejecting it. And so I think that tends to be the biggest problem is that they're equipped with the Adventist worldview.
Well, and I used to think Adventists, like you just said, I'm going to say it a different way, that we were the cream of the crop. I mean, so
Yeah.
if you
Oh,
got
yeah.
it wrong, then obviously no one below you would be right. And so you're the cream of the crop, and therefore you're the closest to truth. And if you leave Adventism, then there's no up, it's only
Right.
down. So,
Right.
just
Right.
I've known a lot of Adventists who did go the route of atheism, or agnosticism, really more. But I also know a lot of them that just moved into a more mainstream Christianity. So don't think I'm talking to the audience out there.
Mhm.
Don't think everybody becomes atheist. I think Ellen White said that, that you'd become atheist if you gave up.
Yeah.
You
She
gave
says
up
if you
the
reject
Sabbath.
her writings, you'll eventually reject the Bible outright, and
Yeah.
that doing so is a fast track to perdition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not that way for all Adventists.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
Adventists
remember
are-
hearing that a lot as a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Throughout the books, which you've had them, all the SDA books for the
Oh,
grade
yeah.
schools and all of that. Yeah, that's where a lot of the fear started.
Yep.
So I don't want to be an atheist. I don't want to hate God.
Yeah. Well, and as a kid, your level of awareness and development is only so matured, that when you're seeing these like end time seminars, in your brain or in your mind, you're like filling in a lot of gaps where you don't understand like the nuance of things, or like you're just not mature enough. So like when you're hearing these sorts of things, especially in those formative years, you're
Yeah.
like burning onto your mind these
Yeah.
sorts of like images and filling in a lot of the gaps, and then that
Mhm.
stuff kind of goes along and gets carried with you. Because I don't know
Right.
how many former SDAs I've talked to who still struggle with like eschatological fears,
Mhm.
Yes.
that like at any moment
Oh, yeah.
things are just going to pop off and it's
Yeah.
going to be too late, and like probation's going to be over,
Yeah.
and the
Right.
time of trouble is just going to begin, and
That's
like
Yeah.
meteors crash into the sky and the
that's right.
cities are going to be exploding, and then Satan's going to manifest and be the one that's going to dazzle everyone and unite
Right.
everyone, and part of that is going to be the Sunday law.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
and
right.
and you just get all this stuff, and so it's like, to people like that, just associate with these people. Associate with other people. Like,
Yeah.
we don't agree on everything here, me and then and you guys, but you can like discuss and have dialogues without being so fearful about
Yeah,
like,
that's right. That's
or
right.
even just I can't stand how it seems like in this context alone, this is the only context where you're only allowed to like talk with people, and this isn't just Adventists, but like you're only allowed to talk with people who think just like you do.
Mhm.
Right.
Or if you are talking, it has to be contentious, because
Yeah.
that's the issue that SDAs will take with
That's
this
right.
Okay,
discussion.
so what happened
That's
to
right.
they'll know you're Christians by your love one for another? Now I know that a lot of people say, okay, well, but we're the United people are the only people that believe in one way. In other words, the Methodists are united, therefore that is the group that you have
Yeah,
to
but even
love.
the United Methodists though affirm the universality of the church.
Right.
It's like
Yeah.
Adventists don't
Yeah.
understand this. They don't
That's right.
understand that like there's so many problems. Like, the other thing I love to bring up with them in this same vein is
Mhm.
like, I like to do thought experiments with them. So typically with the ones who try to appeal to like the Protestant reformers, because like that's the other thing I'm very vocal about on our platform. I cannot stand, they are not Protestant. And I don't like the water being blurred. And part of my, just one of those personal things, it's like, this kind of drives me nuts, and I'm going to make sure to vocalize it. That
Mhm.
is like the one of those things for me. The like, you guys need to own up what you are. You're your
Yeah.
own thing.
Yeah.
Don't confuse people. Just tell people what you actually believe. So, anyways, in the vein of like, they love to appeal to the Protestant reformers. And so
Oh yeah.
oftentimes,
Yeah.
one thing I love to ask them about is, do you consider Catholics Christians? And see what they
Well,
say.
Yeah.
And
yeah, most of them say,
and the
well, right now it's okay, but
yes,
later.
but a lot of them will tell you, well, no, no,
Oh, really? Okay.
they're not. And the ones that do, and again, this is when they appeal to the reformers. I
Mhm.
ask them, do you consider the reformers Christians? And they'll say yes, because they were obedient to the light that they had in their day.
Yeah.
Because that's what Ellen White said in the Great
Right.
Yeah.
Controversy,
Yeah.
as well as elsewhere. Well, then I point out to them, well, you have a conundrum here, because their reformers were infant baptized Roman Catholics. That
Mhm.
was their entryway into God's covenant community of people.
Mhm.
So you shouldn't appeal to individuals who you think are helping you out, when in reality, if you were being consistent, you'd have to even say that they weren't valid Christians, because they're not holding
Okay.
that position
Right.
that you're
Mhm.
saying,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they're not exposed to these sorts of things.
No.
That's part of the problem. They're not exposed to have to hear what other people believe or what other people think. It's kind of like just a sort of buttoned up kind of system, and we have all the answers kind of laid out in the
Right.
quadrant sheet, and you can kind of just go through the process, learn all the buzz phrases, learn
Mhm.
all the talking points, learn all the proof texts, and you don't have to really learn what other people do. And again, I just think, or learn what other people actually believe. And I think if you do that, and you take the trust, and just, I'm gonna actually just kind of study outside of here, that's going to help you really be able to see that
Mhm. Well,
something's off here.
Adventist universities, I mean, it's not just the elementary school, it's not just the high schools. When you're taught in an Adventist university, they have their own history books
Yep.
that are not
Yeah,
true.
I know.
That, I appeal to you, please, out there listening, go find
I
a
know.
history book that is not Adventist, because they create their own history books, and not to say that a lot of what they say is false, but they don't put the whole thing together. You know, they only pick and choose what history they want to bring in, because you, like you said, it goes into the worldview.
Right.
And so anyway, but
It's compiled off of great controversy.
Mhm.
That's why. And great controversy is a historical revisionism work
Mhm.
that writes the subjects of in focus, the Seventh-day Adventists, into the narrative.
Yeah,
It makes them the center because the majority of the chapters are about them, not history.
right.
So she tries to give this what's considered this inspired oversight from the time of the apostles. Well, it's like, dude, you get it wrong literally with them, because she espouses what Miller was espousing, which is what attracted people like Charles Taze Russell from the Jehovah's Witnesses, etc.
Mhm.
And that was this great apostasy.
Mhm.
Because again, it goes back to the restorationism of the Christian connection and these sorts of groups that they were running around with. It fed into that sort of
Yeah.
idea and zeitgeist. Well, the great controversy then in the you got the 1888 edition, but you've got the early edition as well. And this sort of thing is consistent in both of them. But it's just this historical revisionism. It's not even true. It's like
Yeah.
there's so many things in there that's falsified. So, for example, one of their favorite ones to appeal to is the Waldensians. So
Yeah.
they'll appeal to the Waldensians and they'll say the Waldensians were Seventh-day Sabbath keepers. They carried the torch. No, they
No.
weren't. The Waldensians are Reformed.
Yeah.
They're essentially Presbyterians. To this day, they still are. There's only a small group of them left in like Italy and Argentina or something like that. And no, they never were. Well, if you look in the appendix of the Great Controversy, they've added a note now. And they say, well, it can't be proven that they were actually Seventh-day Sabbath keepers. However,
Mhm.
there is evidence that they celebrated with some Jews sometimes.
That's
So that's
interesting.
their in
I
their
haven't
chain,
heard
because
that one.
in the system you have to have, well, it's in the appendix of the Great Controversy. So
Yeah.
on the
Yeah. I
chapter on the
have-
Waldensians, where
Yeah.
Ellen White says that they carried the torch of the Seventh-day Sabbath, because
Yeah.
she's trying to build this chain that this has always been,
No. Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
that
What'd she say?
so that's why I went,
Her golden thread or whatever the whole.
yeah, straight chain of truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the claim that's coming from this is like what they are is true apostolic Christianity.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the claim. It's true Christianity restored from the time of the apostles, because there was this great apostasy. So it's
Mhm.
all built on this like historical revisionism that when you study outside of that, it's just not true. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it has to be the biggest conspiracy in the world. Seriously, it has to be the biggest conspiracy in the world. They even sent Samuel Bacchiocchi out. That was his
Yeah.
entire mission, was to
Yeah.
prove this, and he even ended up admitting. And then now
Yes.
you have SDAs that'll
Yeah.
say, "Well, he was a Jesuit plant."
Yeah.
So nothing
Well-
will do it. At that point, nothing will do it. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
well,
that's-
you're
yeah.
just committed no matter what the facts are, because if you think you're smarter than that guy is as a laity Adventist,
Yeah.
and this was his dedicated mission by the SDA church to go out and find the golden egg, and he couldn't find it. They had to try and shift, because I don't know if you know about the contradiction between Ellen saying that Pope Sylvester changed the Sabbath
Mhm.
to Constantine changed the Sabbath. So there's an issue there where she has two different figures. Actually, I take that back. It's a Uriah Smith that actually says Pope Sylvester is the one that did it. Ellen says the Constantine did it,
Mhm.
but she also claimed that it wasn't until the 6th century.
Mhm.
So you have two issues there regarding timeline. So the earlier one being Constantine. Samuel Bacchiocchi's mission was essentially to go out and find a date sooner than that, because they have to find a way to try and refute early historical source documents like Ignatius, etc., because they claim that Pope Sylvester is the one that gave the imposing title of Lord's Day to Sunday
Mhm.
after Constantine changed the Sabbath. Well, then it's like, well, okay, what do you do about with Ignatius's epistles?
Mhm.
What do you do with these early sources? Well, then you'll get two typical responses. Those guys were heretics, which is like, oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Or you get, well, that's a forgery.
Okay.
So Samuel Bacchiocchi wasn't willing to do that. He said basically he couldn't find, it's in this long paper. I remember I was reading through it. I'm like, dude, are you ever going to answer if you actually found it? Like you're going on and on and on.
Yeah.
And he eventually goes on and on and on to essentially say, but couldn't find what we were looking for.
Mhm.
So when you study stuff like that, it creates serious, because I mean that's like the whole system now. So now the Sunday law becomes a non-issue when this is disproven. When you understand church is always met on Sunday,
Yeah.
has to do with new creation. It has
Mhm.
nothing to do with Satan. It has nothing to do
Right.
with the Pope. It has nothing to do with Constantine. It has
Or
nothing to do with
worshiping the
being
sun.
yeah, it has nothing to do with Council of Laodicea, which was a regional council that didn't have
Yeah.
any sort of ecumenical jurisdiction. And even so, you then have to deal with the fact that the Western Church is still meeting on the first day, and that was an Eastern council. Like all of these excuses go completely out the window. And
Right.
on that single issue alone, it's like so many things in your system now fall. Again, the Sunday law becomes a non-issue. It's not the mark of the beast,
Yeah.
which means you're not the remnant church with the seal of God uniquely.
Right.
The whole thing falls.
Mm-hmm.
Ellen
Yeah.
White was
Yeah.
wrong. It wasn't coming from Jesus then. It just,
Yeah.
Right.
Christianity's not that fragile, folks. Like it's not that fragile. A system like that, that's another telltale sign. Mormonism's
Mhm.
the same way. Jehovah's Witnesses are the same
Yeah.
way. And it's because they're not built on the Christian foundation that was laid.
Mhm.
And they're trying to reinvent the wheel as like
Yeah.
we're restoring this thing that completely got lost. No, you're just resurrecting a bunch of ancient heresy, and you're not in tune with history and don't realize that like so many. Ted Wilson just put a video out the other day. He's espousing modalism. It's like, dude, you literally just espoused modalism. You're the president of this organization.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
you bring this stuff up, sorry, I know I'm getting worked up.
No, but
It
I
shakes
agree.
me. It's like
Yeah.
SDAs will hear this stuff and they don't think it's a big deal. And it's like, this is a
Right.
huge
It's the whole thing
deal.
is the Trinity. Nobody's thought about the Trinity before. It's almost like it's just now they're coming to terms with, wait a minute, we better know if we're going to be Christian, we better know what the Trinity means.
And then when they're
So,
doing this, they're getting
mhm,
a rife that's like a split taking place because you
mhm,
have all these people who read SDA pioneers who were Arians. So they're
mhm,
like, well, how can you condemn that position? And then you have the other people saying, well, we need to return to the old paths. We've fallen off, and that's like God's, warning us. You have specific SDA individuals out there with a focus on we got to go back to the old paths, old paths. And I've seen a lot more of that ramping up. And so that's probably influencing a lot of SDAs that like, well, you can't condemn Uriah Smith. You can't condemn James White. You can't condemn, I don't remember Joseph Bates' position specifically. I don't know if I don't think he was a full blown Arian. I know he came out of the Presbyterian tradition prior to Millerism. But that's the other thing too. When you understand where they're stealing and borrowing from,
mhm.
and who did the systematizing of their system, it becomes a lot easier to pick that sort of stuff apart. So it was systematized by Uriah Smith, James White, and Joseph Bates. Uriah Smith and James White came from Restorationist Unitarianism. Joseph Bates came from a Presbyterian background, and then Ellen White's Methodist background
Right.
is they're essentially an amalgamation of Methodism or the Reformed tradition
Mhm.
and Restorationist Unitarianism
Mhm.
in specific areas, not across the board. They pick and choose from those different ones
Right.
and mixed it all in the pot. And then they filter that whole pot through the great controversy theme.
Right. And just
So
for
like,
those listening, when we talk about this, the actual physical thing that happened was the Bates and the White, at least James White, would be wrestling with these things, and then Ellen White would then have a vision that would either concur or not concur with what they had decided.
yep,
And so they felt like they had like an actual megaphone to
Yeah.
God to find
Right.
Yep.
out what the
Direct line to God.
right.
yeah,
So that's how the Adventist early doctrines were kind of decided is through, they said Bible study with the vision to
yep,
tell which
confirm.
interpretation is correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's a good point, because I always forget that not everybody's as in tune on some of those things. The claim initially was that, again, this gets back into this first century great apostasy. They all bought into that because that was central to Millerism, and that there was this sort of revival taking place of, William Miller was raised up as a reformer. They
Right.
love to say. We're getting into
Right.
that in a couple weeks. It's just like, no. But the undergirding idea of there being a great apostasy has kind of just bled over into all the groups that ended up going out of Millerism. They all took that idea with them. And so after the Great Disappointment in 1844, and you have the debacle of really the 7-year period it's over a 7-year period.
Right.
There's some that refused to accept that they were wrong. And it was during that they did, like you said, they said, we're going to put all our differences aside. This is the narrative. We're going to put all our differences aside. We're just going to sit down and start over and read the Bible together.
Mhm.
And when they would come to a place, because they did this, the story is that God rewarded them. Because they sought to
Ah,
just be diligent and obedient, God gave them, they'll use the term light.
mhm,
God gave light through Sister White. So
mhm,
she gets her first vision before this stuff happens, supposedly. First vision happens December 1843 regarding the path vision,
mhm.
that all the people that fell, that left, that gave up, they fell off the path into the wicked world that God had
Right.
rejected. These sorts of things. But yeah, through that, they're supposedly studying the Bible. When they agreed and they moved along. When
Mhm.
they didn't agree, Ellen would conveniently be given a vision, and God
Right.
would communicate to her what the
Right.
correct understanding was, giving, in their words, the stamp of approval.
Right.
And so there's 7 visionary doctrines that we have an article on our website about, that you can just type in the search bar 7 visionary and it'll pop up. And
Are those
it goes
early
over all of
writings?
these. Yeah, so
Yeah.
there,
Okay.
yep, exactly. And the all 7 of them are listed. It's essentially the 7 pillars of the SDA church.
Mhm,
But even the stuff outside of that Ellen didn't have a vision on, it's still been filtered through the great controversy
mhm,
theme. So regardless of Adventists will say, well, Ellen White didn't create any of the doctrines of the SDA church. No, right. She didn't just like arbitrarily say, this is what we believe and you
mhm,
have to believe this.
mhm.
And it just
Right.
was like a magic trick that she pulled out. No, but she supposedly was given this great controversy vision, which is what now informs everything.
Right.
So in that sense, she is formulating everything, because this didn't come from God. This is easily demonstrable, and it's what's informing everything.
Mhm.
So in a sense, yeah, she is like, I mean, even down to like the temperance stuff, like it's like so apparently the Christian standard is like 1800s Northeastern America,
Mhm.
because like your ankles
Yeah,
can't
that's right.
show,
Yeah.
and like you can't have like uh wigs cause madness. They'll lead to
Yeah.
early death. They heat
Yeah.
the animalistic lower aspect of the brain, and they're going to lead
Yeah.
to women going mad and not having morals.
Yeah.
Because that wig on their head doesn't look natural. It actually creates like problems, etc. Um, where's that in scripture? Like, that's, you were
Uh,
studying somewhere and got
Yeah.
that out of scripture, that you needed some sort of like commentary. Well, no. So there is a ton of things that are
Yeah. Well,
systematically influenced by strictly Ellen White.
but that was the way they thought at that time, because they believed, the early, the people that came to America, a lot of the early Christians thought that there was going to be a great, Christ was going to come, and that
Oh
America
yeah.
had a great deal to do with the last days. And so they were expecting Christ to come. That's one of the reasons for the Great Awakening. And so Ellen
Yep.
White, they didn't even come up with this. They didn't even come up with that by themselves. There were a lot of prophets at that time in America. And so they were expecting this kind of thing. And so Ellen White kind of fell into this pretty easily. And people were prepared to listen to a female prophet at that time. So I think that's
Yeah.
the reasons that she did so well. And people did believe in her,
And
as
not just that, but the other female. So we have a video that just actually went up tonight regarding one thing about Adventism that is a hallmark of all cults.
Mhm,
And we talk in there about Christian Science, for example. They
mhm,
had Mary Baker Eddy. You
mhm.
had Anne Lee with the Shakers. We could have looked at them as well, which she was in England, and then it kind of made its way over here. But
Right.
nevertheless, the reason Adventism, in my opinion, lasted, unlike some of these other groups, at least at the size and scale and capacity, is because of their early grasp on media publishing, because they were able to, in magazine, circulate stuff
Mhm,
around.
mhm,
And they have over 60 publishing houses to this today,
mhm.
where they're just, I mean, cranking stuff out like crazy. And that's how they send it all over the
Yeah.
world. They translate it, etc. These other groups didn't really do that if you study their history. The only other one, and they're kind of on the same sort of frequency as the Mormons.
Right.
It just wasn't as much, but it's the same sort of model of lots of printing. There's not a lot of parallels there.
Didn't
But
Maxwell do a lot of stuff? And I'm trying to think of his name. What was his name, Maxwell? The artist that does all the little Bible.
Yeah.
Okay, I think he did stuff for Mormons too. Didn't he do some
yeah,
stuff for Mormons as well?
Something.
As
yeah, you're thinking of
Graham Maxwell? What was his? Anyway, he does the Bible
yeah.
stories for kids.
Yeah,
He's
it's you're thinking of
fabulous.
Harry Anderson.
Maybe that's who it is. Okay. Well,
Harry Anderson's the one that did all the art for the Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and SDAs. And
okay.
so most of the SDA art that's not children's art that you saw like hanging up in churches
Mhm.
and that sort of stuff, Harry Anderson did that. Now
Yeah.
the Uncle Arthur, those books were done by Maxwell, I believe.
Mhm.
And then he may have done the My Bible Friends. I don't know if you had those.
Yeah, I've got all of my Bible friends. And so
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
Maxwell. But anyway,
I
he was
believe so.
great. He was a
Yeah,
great
yeah,
artist. And
totally.
I thought that he did. Okay, so maybe I just got that wrong. I knew one of them did a lot of stuff for the Mormons too. So
Yeah, Harry
there's
Anderson.
always this, interconnection.
Well, and that's also telling too that um, like I don't, yeah, like I don't know anything about that guy, but it's just what we were talking about earlier. Like, I would not make art for Mormons.
Yeah.
Like, I would not make art for Mormons. So, like, your radar should go off on that, or Jehovah's Witnesses. But then again, you'll make art for if you're an Adventist and you'll make art for an Adventist. I guess it makes sense to why you would do something like that. But those are just the sort of things I think about that. Just kind of goes back to what you said about not strong Christology in Adventism.
That's right. That's right.
When we left, we even had somebody argue with us. I mean, quite vehemently, very emotionally, saying that even if Christ himself were to die or go away or whatever, they would have the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are the thing that is eternal. And so and I didn't expect this from these people. So in the end, they defend the 10 Commandments even more than they defend Christ himself.
Yeah.
And I found that because us leaving pushed them into having to say what they really didn't want to think.
Right.
They actually were thinking it deep down, and it just brought it all to the surface. And I thought, that's really what they are going to defend the 10 Commandments above everything. Like the 10 Commandments are everything, because the 10 Commandments didn't include mercy. It didn't include forgiveness. It didn't there's so many wonderful things that it did not include. And you'd think that they would figure out when they read the New Covenant that this is a much broader, it's really about Christ. And yet when they cling to the 10 Commandments, it just takes precedent even over Christ himself. And so that's why you can get guys that will do that. It's because Christ isn't what it's all about. It's about the 10 Commandments. It's not okay. Like when you say the new creation, all the early church fathers understood this.
AKA all Christians. Like,
yes,
they'll hear that and they'll say, well, we don't care about church fathers. Well, you should, true. Because history matters. Christianity is an ancient faith. It's historic. And you need to understand, even if you disagree with it now, this was like universally understood in both the East and the West. So this is old. This is long before Adventism. The idea of Seventh-day Sabbath is not new to the 1800s.
Right.
You've got on Sabbath and circumcision, which is essentially Athanasius giving a treatise on this exact subject of like showing the parallel that if you're going to be a Seventh-day Sabbatarian, you really also have to hold to circumcision. And essentially goes through, and he goes hard on like the eighth day motif. He goes on a number of things. But the point being is, in a lot of their minds, it's like they think Sabbath was like oh yeah, we'd never thought of that until like the 1800s, when now they're like
Yeah,
out telling people, and oh, if people just heard this,
yeah,
they would see it. And it's like, well, dude, not somebody who's like well versed
mhm,
in their beliefs,
yeah,
especially if you've come out of Adventism like I have. And again, I've studied this probably a lot more than
yeah,
um other people,
mhm,
and that's exactly correct. This
mhm,
has been understood for a long time, and people were teaching this to their children. It's in
yeah,
catechisms. Like,
yeah,
it's not uh
yeah,
it's been dealt that issue, that the Sabbath issue was like dealt with very, very early on, along with circumcision. And so again, it's just kind of like
and
resurrecting ancient arguments on things. That's like that this was dealt with like literally like 1800 years ago.
And I think that they should understand that. That's why you can't find a lot of theologians that know the answers anymore. It's because nobody has thought about the Sabbath. Nope, that has not been an issue for so long that you don't have a lot of theologians and scholars that know how to answer
Yep,
Adventists.
correct.
That's not on the
Yeah.
radar.
Yep. And it's funny you say that. I was talking with a former Adventist friend. We talk pretty regularly, and he was saying how it was just kind of something that was taken for granted because like everyone just
Mhm.
understood this.
Yeah,
There was like no
yeah,
grand conspiracy
yeah,
or any of this sort of
yeah.
stuff. And with the rise of a group like, Seventh-day Adventism, that was something that I was like, I have to study this a lot more and get a lot deeper than like, I've responded to Doug Batchelor, John Lomacang, these types of peoples, and both of them said in videos we recently responded to, they felt Adventism was vindicated on this subject because they tried three different churches in their town, and none of them could give an answer that was
Yeah,
satisfactory to the Sabbath. So therefore, that proves, see,
right.
Adventism's true.
Yeah.
Oh.
And there was no consulting of like anyone from like 300 years ago, 1,000 years
Mhm,
ago,
mhm,
1,500 years ago.
mhm.
It's like if you really want the answer, especially in this day and age, I don't know when they're doing this, but surely this talk that they're giving, it's like the internet's around now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Get on the computer
Yeah.
and start looking
Yeah, that's
into
right.
this more, and don't just say because the pastor down the street, yeah, believe it or not, he's not omniscient. One of them, he's saying
Yeah.
he went to a priest, he went to a Roman Catholic
Yeah.
church, he
Yeah.
went to a charismatic church and a
Mhm.
non-denominational church. And it's like, well, dude, get on the computer and consult almost 2,000 years on this subject. On this subject, it's like
Yeah.
you have almost 2,000 years of history to go examine. People have been talking about this, and it just hasn't been a hot thing here recently. But like during the Reformation, you had a number of individuals who spent, I mean, they did entire treatises. I have Nicholas Bound's treatise on
Yeah.
it's 1,700 pages.
Yeah.
He walks you all the way through, and the whole crux of it is new creation.
Yeah.
New
Robert
creation. That's
Cox. Have you gotten any of his stuff? Robert
who.
Cox is another. Robert Cox is another one that's done a whole bunch of.
Yeah, so exactly. There's people out there that have dedicated a specific focus
Yeah.
on these sorts of things.
Mhm.
And so uh I don't remember what the initial question was on
We
this
knew.
subject.
We
I
knew
know
we
that
could
we
go.
were.
Well,
Yeah.
we've been going for now 2 hours, so we probably need to get into the section of what are you doing now? Okay, you raised Adventist, you left Adventist. What
Yep.
has been post Adventist been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. Like I said, I kind of had a outside connection to, outside the SDA bubble that I was kind of raised in. I mean, it wasn't like like I said, it wasn't like, well, you can't even associate with people that aren't SDA. It's just that was my experience. That's
Yeah,
my school, my church, my friends, like
yeah,
camp,
Mhm.
all that stuff. So that's just kind of what the exposure was. Well, I kind of had a foot out of that in terms of being able to, um, ha know how to kind of function outside of there. And so, um, life after Adventism has been excellent in the sense that it is great to have peace. Something that I don't think, again, that Adventism can give. And so that doesn't mean that there hasn't been hardships. It doesn't mean that there hasn't been a lot of wrestling with things, those sorts of things. But I went to SDA University after being an Adventist, which was an interesting experience. Like I
Oh
said, we kind of
yeah.
talked about that a little bit. But I did that specifically because, again, I had this burden to engage apologetically with Adventists because as I was leaving, I kind of touched on this some as well earlier. I didn't feel like there was really much out there for former Adventists because when you're not really seeing anyone do that in your limited scope of vision,
Right.
you really question like, is this the right move, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so I knew that I wanted to like do something that made a difference in that area, but I didn't feel equipped. And so it definitely wasn't the time at that point. But I mean, really life after Adventism has just been I'm not angry. A lot of SDAs think I'm a
Yeah.
constantly angry individual, or like I hate the law of God, or I hate the Sabbath, or I hate Adventists.
That's the standard
Yeah.
excuse.
Yeah.
Well, you
Yeah.
must
Yeah.
have gotten hurt. You were hurt.
Yeah. Like,
Deeply hurt. Or you're
I
angry. No, either one.
I actually really liked Adventism.
Yeah.
I there's many things I admire about Adventists. I don't think Adventists are horrible people. I don't think they're all like malicious, crazy. I think they're deceived, which is why I'm doing this. I think they believe a lot of things that are false, and I don't want. I don't like I don't like deception. Like
Yeah.
the other thing too is like I love the body of Christ.
Mhm.
It just you don't have that in Adventism either. Like you have the Adventist culture, and like you have a constant thread. Like I can go anywhere where there's an SDA church and we're all kind of like on the same page. But I find that at a much larger and more like really just beautiful scale in like the Christian church of like being able to have that level of like well, just unity at like this sort of foundational core, if you will. And so, yeah, it's been because of that love for the body that also kind of drives my frustration of a movement that is like definitionally an accuser of the brethren, while painting the true body of Christ as being some satanic pawn or whatever that irks me. And so, those sorts of things though drove me to wanting to reach more SDAs and say, listen, it's like your book title is. It's okay to not be a Seventh-day Adventist.
That's right.
It's okay to not be a Seventh-day Adventist. And so, yeah, over the years, just I'm a graphic designer by trade. So I got my degree in art from an Adventist university, but spent that time, a lot of my time there, sharpening my like theological sword, if you will. Not necessarily like getting it bloody every time, just like lopping people's heads off. But like asking questions, learning more about, like orthodox foundational Christian teaching in comparison with like, well, what are they saying about this? And kind of navigating through those sorts of things. And then, yeah, that burden kind of just stuck with me over the years. I'm kind of a theology nerd. I was speaking into a little bit earlier about, I have a mind that kind of is bent toward like deeper things. And so I love studying about, like I feel like like if Thomas Aquinas was alive, I feel like I would fit in with like in that circle of people, like those sort of talkers and thinkers. And so that's kind of naturally my bent. And so I knew I wanted to do something that equipped Christians, because that was the other problem I kept running into. All these people are just like, oh yeah, they're just like Christians. They just go to church on Saturday and they're vegetarians.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's like it's like totally, it's a different thing. They're like using the same language, but they do not mean the same thing. It's
That's
like a
right.
totally,
That's
it's a
what we
totally,
voted.
That is right.
it's a totally different thing.
They
Like,
have different definitions for all these ecclesiastical words.
yep. And I'm not saying that like Christians don't disagree on some of these things, but like there's certain things that like, well, we were just talking about it, the Trinity. There's not multiple versions of that.
Right.
There's not like, oh, well, we have a version of a Trinity. No. The Trinity is the one true God, and that is something very specific. And so navigating through all that theological fog, if you didn't have a great controversy worldview and you didn't come out of this, it's like, man, it's going to be impossible for somebody to really be able to like demystify this and be able to speak both languages as like a translator, if you will, of like, well, here's what they're actually saying by this. So that burden sat with me for a long enough time to where I'm like praying about this. I'm thinking, I'm talking and consulting with pastors and elders, and trying to like seek counsel on doing this. And
Oh, wait a
eventually I
minute.
got to a point.
To who were you seeking counsel? Not
Uh,
ad.
pa- no, pastors,
Okay,
my
to making
pastors
sure.
and elders. No, no,
Okay.
no. And this is after leaving Adventism. You're talking like 5 years being out, 6 years
Okay.
being out, 7 years being out. This burden's kind of weighing on me, and I don't know what it's going to look like to do something like this. Um, but I kept praying, and eventually I just had the thought, there's no one out there doing this. Maybe I'm supposed to do it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
maybe I should do it.
Yeah.
I'm sitting
Yeah.
here wondering, like, why isn't there anything out there like this? Like I see these things to Mormons, to Jehovah's Witnesses,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
SDAs are just kind of like overlooked. And it's like, well,
Uh,
if it's a deception and it's leading people to hell,
mhm.
uh, we need to warn these people. Like
Yes.
coming from that world, it's just all kumbaya around the fire. Everything is okay. We're part. There's like this underlying thing of like, we're the SDAs. We're God's, true people. We have the light on the Sabbath, and these sorts of things. Just everyone's kind of
Yeah.
going through the motions, and there's
Yeah.
nobody. There's nobody sounding the alarm.
Yeah.
No one. People just leave. They don't say anything.
Right.
Whatever. And so you kind of do have to go in like the bull in a china shop sort of approach to some degree to like really, I feel, reach some of these people because it's not going on. And so I knew that I had that burden, wanted to act on it, kept praying about it, and then just had the idea of a YouTube channel. I didn't have any experience with cameras, on camera presence.
Mhm.
I wasn't like an online guy as it
Mhm.
was. Wasn't a public figure or personality.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what Answering Adventism was going to turn into. I just knew I was going to start a YouTube channel, and I had all these notes all over the place.
Mhm.
Notebooks, physical notebooks, Google
Mhm.
Doc notes, books, just like all this stuff scattered. And I was like, this could also simultaneously work as my way of like systematizing my way through all this,
Mhm.
but then letting that information be shared with other people. So
Mhm.
that was just kind of the thinking at the beginning. Like, I want to start a YouTube channel where I'm just going to share all this, 10 years now of like
Mhm.
studying this, like in,
Yeah.
Yeah.
quiet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so started doing that, and it kind of snowballed a lot more than I thought it would, especially for like the first year. I got connected with another former Adventist who is a wizard when it comes to marketing and websites.
Mhm.
So I did the front end design, the visual look of the website. He did the actual back end
Yeah.
implementation of building such a thing.
Mhm.
And we were able to get the website up and going. And then it kind of just snowballed into a number of things that I wasn't necessarily anticipating. And so it's kind of snowballed to where it's at now. And it just continues to
Mhm.
grow, which is exciting. I'm pretty much doing this full time now. Um,
And do
Wow.
you have a wife and family to take care of?
I do.
Okay,
And
so guys,
so,
remember that. Help him out.
That's
hey, I
right.
appreciate that.
Help him out
It,
financially.
it's funny when you'll get SDAs that say you're doing this for the money, and it
Yeah, I
it
know.
it, it, it actually cracks me up because I'm not. And if you saw how much money I'm making off of this, and I lost money to do this.
Yeah.
We lose money to my family loses money to do this, but we see it as important enough that it's worth
Oh, yeah.
investing into. And
Yeah,
yeah,
we
I would
lost
love,
money on the It's Okay Not to Be Seventh Adventist. Lost.
yeah, yeah, but you'll hear them tell you, you're
Yeah.
doing this for
Yeah.
the money. And it's
Yeah.
like, folks, if I was doing this for the money, I would have a channel on politics. I would be doing comment where the target is like millions of
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, because they'll say, well, there's millions of Adventists. Yeah, but it's a very small niche. And not just that, but apologetics also tends to be on the lower side of
Right.
engagement when it comes to like
That's
the
right.
religious aspect of YouTube. People tend to want to hear like the Christian drama
Yeah.
outlets, or like really highbrow interviews and stuff like that. So to say that it's being done for the money is just it's just not true. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at today, though. That's kind of how Answering Adventism got started and snowballed, was kind of birthed out of just wanting to at least sound the warning alarm, because again, I like Adventists. I don't hate Adventists. If I hated Adventists, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd say,
Right.
well, screw them. Just
Yeah.
let them keep
Exactly.
going where they're going. But
Yeah.
it just, yeah, had
Well,
a burden that was like, I can't let that happen.
it really is. It's they need to just break out. If they could just see the freedom, Arthur and I have talked about, when you leave Adventism, you feel like you've been taken out of a dark box.
Yep.
And there's just this beautiful mansion you're in now of Christianity. And there are so many Christians out there that love the Lord. And I know this is going to insult Adventists. I'm not meaning to insult you, but they know so much more than Adventists. They
Yep.
love the Lord. When I left Adventism, I could not believe how smart these other people were. I could not believe how much they loved the Lord. It's an amazing experience. And you do want to come in and help. You do want to come back and go, I want to help these poor people, because they don't realize that deception hurts you. This is not good. They're so into what they eat before they die. They don't even know how to live. They're living, to die. And what you need to do is get out there and learn what living for Christ really means. And all you have to do is open up the door and start talking to some non-Adventists. Read some non-Adventist books. There are people that love the Lord as much or way more than you do, which, again, people don't like to hear that. People don't like to hear that, anything that insults them. I don't mean to.
It's true though. And that's what I'm saying is like that's one of the things, like I have my own personal irks, obviously, like the things that personally are bigger peeves for me about the movement. And that's one of them. Just this, like, I can't stand a lot of Adventists, not all, but a lot of Adventists love to play the victim.
Mhm.
And when you critique their theology, it's persecution, and all of a sudden, yet it's like, man, have some self-awareness.
Mhm.
Your pioneers anathematized literally all of Christendom.
Yeah.
Said they were all lost.
Yeah.
God's rejected them. They're
Yeah.
no different. I mean, we could go on and on and on. I've done it on my channel. I don't know how many times, on our website. It's like, it's all there. So you're part of a movement that literally is an accuser of the brethren. And when you're actually attached to the body of Christ, and you love the body of Christ, like John talks about in his epistle as one of the hallmarks of born again believers, is you love the body. It's just very frustrating to see a movement that's not only deceptive, that I know Adventism's false. It's not salvageable. I was just talking,
Right.
actually, you mentioned Colleen
Yeah.
Tinker earlier. I was talking with her earlier today about this, that it's not salvageable. So when it's in that sort of condition, and you've studied it at this level, to hear them just lobbing stuff about people they know nothing about.
Right.
People that I know, they're not all Presbyterian. That's the other thing. The Adventism is bigger than the Presbyterian church. It's like, I don't think Presbyterians are the only Christians. See, you guys don't understand. It's bigger than this little thing here, this little like pocket of people. They take the idea of Adventism and apply that to everyone else. And it's like, no, your pioneers were insulting literally everyone. It irks me. It irks me.
Yeah. That's right.
Wow. Well, we're gonna have to have you back on. You are really good. I'm not a speaker. You are. I have the heart. You definitely have the golden John Chrysostom.
Yeah, golden mouth.
Golden mouth. You're our new
Chrysostom.
John Chrysostom.
Yeah, I know that because I read a lot of Chrysostom.
Oh, you do? Isn't he great?
Well, I read a lot of his homilies, and so and then I've read a number of I'm a big Chrysostom guy, and so pretty much every person that writes some sort of like historical write-up on Chrysostom always has to mention that the name means golden mouth. So
yeah. Well, do you have you read about what he says about the Sabbath?
Well, what aspect?
Well,
what particularly?
Literally, it's been a really long day. I can't remember, but I just remember that he was very much in I think it was in the pocket of the Sabbath the Sabbath is Sunday. And I'm thinking again, I hate to say that because I can't. Do you remember?
I don't remember.
But he was one of the main guys we went to because he has a lot of things to say about the Sabbath. So
Yeah, well, he was, and not to open up this again, because again, it's a wide topic that I could talk.
okay, yeah,
I love this topic. Yeah, he's one of the guys that Nicholas Bound, for example, points back to as uh laying out like early systematized components of, yeah, the first day, and like it was all
yeah,
rooted
yeah,
in the new creation. But
yeah.
see, he didn't mean Sabbath the way that Adventists do.
Right.
That's the big
See,
hang up that you
Yeah.
have with
that
Right.
they
that is
import
where. Go ahead.
they import into that word
Mhm.
things that I've heard some of them, for example, appeal to the likes of those individuals who are using the word Sabbath favorably.
Uh,
But then when they have it explained to them, they're not saying
that's
at
right.
all what you're claiming.
Yeah.
So he essentially says the same thing that Eusebius does in his commentary on Psalm 92.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, he essentially says exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Is that he recognizes the first day as, when they're saying Sabbath, they're meaning like memorial.
Mhm.
It's the memorial day of something
Mhm.
that points to Jesus. And so
Right.
it was the day that Christ accomplished and
Yeah.
entered his rest, like God in creation. God in redemption entered his
Yeah.
rest the first day after he accomplished the work of new creation, where
Mhm.
he redeemed that old creation that fell, making it anew,
Yeah.
and then entered his rest after doing so by entering into heaven and ascending and sitting on his throne. And
Yeah.
that all happened on the first day. And so that's what he means when he's talking about the
Yeah.
first day being a Sabbath, or set aside or distinct. He says
Yeah.
something similar to Origen. Origen said the same thing in his homilies on Numbers,
Mhm.
Numbers 23, I think it is.
Mhm.
But he talks about how the well, sorry, I don't want to. I could
Oh
keep
yeah.
just
You-
going
It's
on all this
excellent.
Let me
stuff.
Yeah.
tell you, if Adventists could do a history of the beautiful meaning of Sabbath, it is so much bigger.
Yeah.
Yep,
They have condensed it to
sadly,
one little tiny meaning. And so you and I, and of course, all of us, I don't mean just you and I, but I mean, we agree more than you realize on the Sabbath. It's that when I say the Sabbath that the Adventists want to portray as the Sabbath is no longer.
correct.
There is so I avoid using the word Sabbath around Adventists because they have stuck what their meaning. And
Yep,
so I love the idea that you have done something I find very bold. I have been very resident. What's the word? I'm so tired
reticent.
today.
That is-
I am really, really tired tonight. It's been a big, but I've enjoyed the fact that you've done most of the talking. But to use the word Sabbath in front of Adventists because it means something so different to
Yep.
the body of Christ, and I don't want them to get confused. But you have boldly reclaimed it, and God bless you.
Yeah, because I concede. I say this a lot. I concede nothing to them,
Yeah,
nothing,
yeah, yeah.
because even that subject, um, and I hate, I'm in that same boat. It depends on the context, I guess, but I'm in that same sort of boat of like, I try to use like explain it in other terms because I don't want all
Right,
that extra baggage that they've
right.
attached to
Yeah,
it. But what they don't understand is the Sabbath is like a, well, and what I mean by this is the whole Bible, but it's like a bit like biblical theology. It's like a
uh-huh.
biblical doctrine. It's far more than Exodus 20 and
Yes.
Jesus said Sabbath is made for man. Like these
Yeah,
little proof texts,
yeah.
when you see from Genesis to Revelation, and I've talked about this, we responded to Doug Batchelor, where it's just all the standard talking points and like the myths, but missing these like key things that like, I don't know how much you guys have looked into this, but like when you start to do a biblical theology of this, the first day was the original setup prior to the fall.
But
Man wasn't there on the seventh day,
William Miller made that. If you look through
or the first day. Sorry.
when you look through Miller's, when he was going around telling the Lord the Lord was going to come in 1843, he actually had a series of sermons he gave, and one of them was that Sunday was the original Sabbath because of what you're saying. It was
Yeah,
because it was yeah, it
because
was the
man
first
was
day for
not
man.
correct. Man was not there on day one,
That's
two,
right.
3. So it wasn't man's seventh day. It was God's seventh day,
Right.
which is still the rest that God is in and has been in, because he never see or he when he ceased and entered his rest. He ceased and entered his rest. Jesus entered in there ahead of us. Like they don't get any of this sort of stuff. Like that's what the author of Hebrews is getting at in Hebrews 3 and 4 is that like Jesus entered in ahead of us into the better promised land as a better Moses and a better Joshua leading a better redemption. He entered his rest on the first day, and as the second Adam. Now you get into the first Adam and the second Adam, which Augustine has all sorts of good stuff on. But like they don't have a concept like that. Like when you look at it in totality, prior to the fall, man starts in holy communion with God because based on evening to evening is what a day was considered. Man wasn't there until the evening of the sixth day. Well, Adam more than likely would have been there earlier in the day because if you read through the tasks of things that he had to do, it's like, well, it couldn't have been the end of the day when he did this. So Eve for sure, though, was at the end of the day, at the evening. So she didn't experience, and Adam didn't experience the evening of the fifth day. They experienced evening from the sixth day to the seventh day. Well, day 6 was preparation day. So God prepared and fashioned man to then enter into holy communion with him before then going out and taking dominion and subduing the earth and essentially repeating that pattern. Well, when man sins, even the rest of man becomes cursed. And so that moves, and man's going to toil now by the sweat of his brow, and he's going to have to work to rest. And then the second Adam comes and does what the first Adam failed to do. He conquers and overcomes temptation, etc. And then he redeems that creation that man broke, and he restores that order back to how it was prior to the fall, which was the first day. So then you have all the eighth day motif stuff. You have, I mean, there's just their minds are typically blown when I start getting in on this with a lot of them because they don't realize just how it's everywhere. It's in the Psalms, it's in Deuteronomy, it's in Exodus, it's in Genesis, it's in Hebrews, it's in Isaiah. It is all over the place. You can bring this out, but you can't just microscopically zoom in on one little portion of redemptive history and then blow that up to be normative.
Have you ever done any studies into how the calendar, the early church looked at the stars as the calendar. That's what they did. And the stars falling, some of the early fathers believed this was the calendar itself was being restored. And now a whole year, this new creation revolves around the Son who is Christ. So that's everything is revolving. And so that is why the day of the Sabbath, I guess I don't like to use that word, but the holy day,
the Lord's Day
is the first day, because now we're starting a whole new creation, a whole new where the whole entire yearly calendar revolves around Christ himself.
So,
I don't know if you heard.
Well, absolutely, I have. That's the can of worms I was going to open earlier. That's exactly what Eusebius says in Psalm 92. So Psalm 92 is a psalm for the Sabbath day. And in his homily where in his commentary on Psalm 92, he brings out that exact thing, that like the true, and he's in his context, he's also using, well, just like any person would, you're going to use examples and like speak about things from your current day and age and your vantage point. Well, he's dealing with pagans who are actual sun worshipers. So this is somewhere I actually point to a lot of times to show them that it's very odd that you're calling this person a sun worshiper when he has writings against said people. And in that commentary, he says that our calendar revolves now around Christ, who is the true sun, the morning light. And that he even brings out or shows how there's a motif around the old Sabbath started in the darkness at the night of Friday, all the way through to the darkness on Saturday, whereas the Lord's Day now begins at the morning light of the first day of the new creation, and how we start that morning in the sunrise, not at darkness. All of these sorts of things and parallels. So yes, I have heard that. And it's been a minute since I heard the thing about the stars falling, but that's just one of those interesting little nuggets of like, it's just interesting. It's fascinating.
It's just so beautiful. It's so inspiring. I just wish because when you know these things, you're not diminishing the Sabbath. You're
No.
actually bringing it to its greatest fulfillment. And they don't even like the fact that Christ is our Sabbath.
I know.
They don't like to hear that because they want the Sabbath to almost be above Christ. But when you can see the true beauty of the Sabbath, it blows and overshadows anything that has ever been taught about the Sabbath pre-Christ.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and they conflate and confuse the memorial with the thing that the memorial represents.
Mhm.
Like to them, the day is the substance. It's
yeah,
like it's almost like
That's right.
at midnight on Saturday, wherever you're at, it just like something there's like a divine characteristic infused into the day,
Mhm.
where now this day has this like divine quality
Yeah,
to
yeah.
it.
It's
Whereas,
mystical.
whereas no, the substance is Jesus Christ, and the
Yes.
memorial is something that points ultimately to him. The day is just the memorial. They also don't realize too, like one of their big arguments that they love to try and use is, well, the law can't change. The law is a reflection of God's character, so therefore it can't change.
Mhm.
And in this, they assume the error that I just pointed out. They assume that the day is A, eternal, and B, part of an aspect that cannot change. Yet they don't recognize that in the second giving of the law, in Deuteronomy 5, the Sabbath isn't rooted in creation. It's
Right.
rooted in redemption.
Yeah.
It says you're to keep the Sabbath and remember I'm the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. It doesn't say anything about creation. So
Mhm.
as redemptive history is unfolding, already from the beginning of the first day, man's first day, and then that being moved to the end of his week, then in the second giving of the law, we have the ceremonial form of the law changing. That's what that aspect is. That part of the law is it can change. Not only it can, but it
Yeah.
has.
Yeah.
So the day is a part of the ceremonial form. So in the
Mhm.
new covenant, we have a new covenant form. It's just like in the old covenant, you had Passover. In the new covenant, we have the Eucharist. In the
Right.
old covenant, we had
Circumcision.
circumcision. In the new
Yeah.
covenant, we have
That's right.
baptism.
Mhm.
In
Yeah.
the old covenant, we had seventh day. In the new covenant, we have the first day.
Yeah.
So it's just new covenant forms, and those things can change. God said this. They love to point to Ezekiel, for example, to say, "Oh, see, God says the Sabbath is eternal, so
Mhm.
or it's to be observed for to every generation." Or like it's one of those verses where it's like they'll appeal to somewhere where it says it's a forever
Right.
ordinance. It's a
Mhm.
whatever. Well, the same thing was said about circumcision.
And the
So
Passover.
exactly. So in every
Right.
context, you have to understand the way that that's actually being said and being utilized. And in a sense, you're right. It is still applicable. It just the form is different. You guys
Right.
are caught. They don't understand the difference between the ceremonial form of the law
Yeah.
and the actual like substance behind it, which is
Yes.
ultimately Jesus.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. They're missing out on the greatest fulfillment.
Yep.
I'm considering writing a book that's not just to Adventists, but the story of the Sabbath, and laying out the beauty of it that's being missed because they're constricting it to just a day.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
Well, and it's like Ignatius said, he said, any friend of Christ should keep the first day because to still observe, and I know SDAs get mad when I say this, but let the chips fall where they may. I'm in complete agreement with him. He essentially says to still observe the seventh day Sabbath is an insult to the grace of Christ. Because what you're essentially saying is, I'm still looking for the Messiah.
Yeah,
I'm still
that's
looking
right.
for I'm still in the old creation, and I'm
Yes.
looking for because it was a memorial of creation and
Yeah.
redemption.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that pointed to Christ who came and
That's
redeemed
right.
the creation. That's
Yeah.
what it's all
That's
about,
Yeah.
redeeming
Yeah.
creation,
Yeah.
which included us, but all things, the cosmos, everything.
Yeah.
And so when you aren't able to like connect those dots, I know SDAs hear that and they think, because in their minds, it's like they're never being told, like, no, actually, you don't understand the Sabbath. And what you observe is actually an insult to Christ and his grace. And that's, again, Ignatius said that, a couple of other church fathers said that as well. But the whole point that they were getting at is that what you're essentially saying is like, the Messiah hasn't come. I'm still
That's
looking for
right.
the Messiah because it's that you're
Right.
taking a type and a shadow when we're now in this the
Right.
fulfillment of that.
That's right. Well, we probably should go. He's got to get up in the morning at 5 and we'll go to work because we only do this for fun once in a while. So we
No worries.
don't make any money, but we have so enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you.
You just have a beautiful way of expressing everything, and we so appreciate it. And God bless you.
Likewise.
well
Thank you.
done.
Thank you for.
Well done.
Go ahead.
Miles.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I had a good time. Always a pleasure to chat it up with you guys, even if it frustrates some individuals.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm big on freedom of association. So
Yes.
Joe Heschmeyer, for example, he's coming on Answering Adventism here in a couple weeks.
I love Joe. He's
Yeah,
great.
so we're going to talk about some of these claims from from the SDA Church regarding Roman Catholicism, and basically do like we just talked about, like,
Oh,
folks,
he's
you
great.
don't have. It's like, folks, you can disagree with somebody, but
Yes.
it doesn't mean you have to misrepresent people.
Right.
Like, understand what people are actually saying, and
Right.
seek to. And I know, again, a lot of Adventists are going to say, "Well, that's ironic coming from you." I go to primary source documentation.
Yeah.
So if you want to argue with me my homework, let's argue my homework and see if I did it right. But I'm not just, making stuff up. On the
Right.
SDA side, you've got people they're just talking out the side of their neck. It's like, you
Yeah.
guys didn't go to
Yeah.
primary sources for this.
That's right.
Or if they did, it's like it's twisted or whatever. So yeah, he'll be coming on in a couple weeks to
That's fabulous.
do a
He's
little
great guy.
test on that
Yeah.
stuff. So that'll ruffle some feathers as well. But again, I'm big on freedom of association. So if people
Yeah.
don't like it, well,
That's
people
right.
don't like it. So
Well, don't you
But
think
thanks
it's
for having
important for the world to see that Christians love each other, even if we completely disagree?
yeah, and
Love each
like, and
other.
not just that, but like, not every discussion has to be like contentious either.
Yeah.
Again, I think there's
Right.
sometimes kind of like an unfair standard in
Yeah.
this context of
Yeah.
like, oh, well, I can only talk to people that agree with me, and when it comes to theologically, and
Right.
if I
Yeah.
disagree with them, it has to be about some sort of contentious thing. But
It always has to
thank
be
you.
a proselytization.
Yeah, right,
always gotta be
right.
that,
Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, thank you for having me, and
Thank you
it was
for
it was
coming.
fun. Yeah, absolutely, it was fun,
bless.
and yeah, we'll have to do it again sometime.
Okay.
Excellent.